Welcome to our channel. Hollywood Movie Review. Goodfellas 1990 Movie Review. Goodfellas, stylized as Goodfellas, is a 1990 American biographical gangster film directed by Martin Scorsese, written by Nicholas Pileggi and Scorsese, and produced by Irwin Winkler. It is a film adaptation of Pileggi's 1985 nonfiction book Wise Guy. Starring Robert De Niro, Ray Liotta, Joe Pesci, Lorraine Bracco, and Paul Sorvino, the film narrates the rise and fall of mafia associate Henry Hill and his friends and family from 1955 to 1980. Scorsese initially titled the film Wise Guy and postponed making it. He and Pileggi later changed the title to Goodfellas. To prepare for their roles in the film, De Niro, Pesci, and Liotta often spoke with Pileggi, who shared research material remaining from writing the book. According to Pesci, improvisation and ad-libbing came from rehearsals wherein Scorsese gave the actors freedom to do whatever they wanted. The director made transcripts of these sessions, took the lines that he liked most and put them into a revised script, from which the cast worked during principal photography. Goodfellas premiered at the 47th Venice International Film Festival on September 9, 1990, where Scorsese was awarded with the Silver Lion Award for Best Director, and was released in the United States on September 18 by Warner Brothers. When released, the film grossed $47 million against a budget of $25 million and received widespread acclaim. The film was nominated for 6 Academy Awards, including Best Picture and Best Director, with Pesci winning Best Supporting Actor. The film also won 5 BAFTAs, including Best Film and Best Director, and was named the year's best film by various critics groups. Widely regarded as one of the greatest films ever made, particularly in the gangster genre, the critical consensus on review aggregator Rotten Tomatoes calls it arguably the high point of Martin Scorsese's career. In 2000, it was deemed culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant and selected for preservation in the National Film Registry by the United States Library of Congress. Its content and style have been emulated in numerous other pieces of media. In 1955, teenager Henry Hill becomes enamored by the criminal life and mafia presence in East New York, a working-class Italian-American neighborhood in Brooklyn, New York City. He begins working for local capo regime Paulie Cicero and his associates Jimmy Conway, an Irish-American truck hijacker and gangster, and Tommy DeVito, a fellow juvenile delinquent prone to violence. Henry begins as a fence for Jimmy, gradually working his way up to more serious crimes. In 1965, Henry starts dating Karen Friedman, a Jewish-American woman who is initially confused by Henry's criminal activities. She is soon seduced by Henry's glamorous lifestyle and marries him despite the disapproval of her parents. Henry, Tommy, and Jimmy manage to excel in carjacking and stealing cargo trucks from JFK Airport, and eventually, they commit the Air France robbery in 1967. On June 11, 1970, Billy Batts, a made man in the Gambino crime family who was recently released from prison, insults Tommy at a nightclub that is owned by Henry. In response, Tommy and Jimmy brutally beat him to his apparent death. Realizing that the unsanctioned murder of a made man will invite retribution, Jimmy, Henry, and Tommy bury the body in upstate New York, stabbing and fatally shooting him when he is discovered to still be alive. 6 months later, Jimmy learns that the burial site is slated for development, prompting them to exhume and relocate the decaying corpse. In 1974, Karen harasses Henry's mistress Janice and threatens Henry at gunpoint. Henry moves in with Janice, but Paulie insists that he return to Karen after collecting a debt from a gambler in Tampa with Jimmy. Jimmy and Henry are arrested after being turned in by the gambler's sister, an FBI typist, and they receive 10-year prison sentences. To support his family on the outside, Henry has Karen smuggle in drugs from Pittsburgh, which he sells to fellow inmates. In 1978, Henry is paroled and expands his cocaine business with Jimmy and Tommy against Paulie's orders. Jimmy organizes a crew to raid the Lufthansa vault at JFK Airport, stealing $6 million in cash and jewelry. After some members purchase expensive items against Jimmy's orders and the getaway truck is found by police, he has most of the crew killed. Only Henry and Tommy are spared, as Henry is making him money through his Pittsburgh connection and Tommy is about to become a made man. However, Tommy is killed when he arrives at the bogus initiation ceremony in 1979 in retribution for murdering bats, much to Jimmy's dismay and anger. By 1980, Henry has become a nervous wreck due to heavy cocaine use. He sets up another drug deal with his Pittsburgh associates but is arrested by narcotics agents and incarcerated. After bailing him out, Karen explains that she flushed $60,000 worth of cocaine down the toilet to prevent FBI agents from finding it during their raid, leaving the Hills penniless. Feeling betrayed by Henry's drug dealing and realizing that he is a liability, Paulie gives him $3,200 out of pity and ends their association, which revokes Henry's protection from Jimmy, and makes him fair game. Henry meets Jimmy at a diner and is asked to travel to a hit assignment, but the request makes him suspicious. Henry realizes that Jimmy plans to have him killed and decides to finally become an informant and enroll with his family in the witness protection program. Henry gives sufficient testimony and evidence in court to have Paulie and Jimmy convicted, and moves to a neighborhood in an undisclosed location, in accordance with the witness protection program. Henry describes his unhappiness by leaving his exciting and turbulent gangster life, feeling condemned to live a boring, average life as a schnook. Goodfellas is based on New York crime reporter Nicholas Pileggi's book Wise Guy. Martin Scorsese did not intend to make another mafia film, but he saw a review of Pileggi's book, which he read while working on The Color of Money in 1986. He had always been fascinated by the mob lifestyle, and was drawn to Pileggi's book because he thought that it was the most honest portrayal of gangsters that he had ever read. After reading the book, Scorsese knew what approach he wanted to take, to begin Goodfellas like a gunshot and have it get faster from there, almost like a 2.5-hour trailer. I think it's the only way you can really sense the exhilaration of the lifestyle, and to get a sense of why a lot of people are attracted to it. According to Pileggi, Scorsese cold called the writer and told him, "I've been waiting for this book my entire life," to which Pileggi replied, "I've been waiting for this phone call my entire life." Scorsese decided to postpone making the film when funds materialized in 1988 to make The Last Temptation of Christ. He was drawn to the documentary aspects of Pileggi's book. The book gives you a sense of the day-to-day life, the tedium, how they work, how they take over certain nightclubs, and for what reasons. It shows how it's done. He saw Goodfellas as the third film in an unplanned trilogy of films that examine the lives of Italian Americans from slightly different angles. He has often described the film as a mob home movie that is about money, because that's what they're really in business for. 2 weeks in advance of the filming, the real Henry Hill was paid $480,000. Scorsese and Pileggi collaborated on the screenplay, and during the course of the 12 drafts that it took to reach the ideal script, the reporter realized that the visual styling had to be completely redone. So we decided to share credit. They chose the sections of the book that they liked and assembled them like building blocks. Scorsese persuaded Pileggi that they did not need to follow a traditional narrative structure. Scorsese wanted to take the gangster film and deal with it episode by episode, but start in the middle and move backward and forward. Scorsese compacted scenes, realizing that if they were kept short, the impact after about an hour and a half would be terrific. He wanted to use narration in a manner reminiscent of François Truffaut's 1962 film Jules and Jim, and use all the basic tricks of the new wave from around 1961. This is the first time since Mean Streets that Scorsese is credited as a co-writer. The names of several real-life gangsters are altered for the film. Tommy Two Gun DeSimone became Tommy DeVito, taking the name from Pesci's friend and employee, the former Four Seasons guitarist of the same name, Tommy DeVito. The role was otherwise unrelated to the musician. Paul Vario became Paulie Cicero, and Jimmy the Gent Burke became Jimmy Conway, after Burke's birth surname. Scorsese initially titled the film Wise Guy, but he and Pileggi decided to change the title of their film to Goodfellas because two contemporary projects, the 1986 Brian De Palma film Wise Guys and the 1987 to 1990 TV series Wise Guy, had used similar titles. Once Robert De Niro agreed to play Jimmy Conway, Scorsese was able to secure the money needed to make the film. Ray Liotta, who played Henry Hill, had read Pileggi's book when it came out and was fascinated by it. A couple of years afterward, his agent told him that Scorsese was going to direct a film adaptation. In 1988, Liotta met with Scorsese over a period of a couple of months and auditioned for the film. He campaigned aggressively for a role, although Warner Brothers wanted a well-known actor. He later said, "I think they would have rather had Eddie Murphy than me." Scorsese cast Liotta after De Niro saw him in Jonathan Demme's Something Wild, 1986. Scorsese was surprised by his explosive energy in that film. Al Pacino and John Malkovich were considered for the role of Conway, and Sean Penn, Alec Baldwin, Val Kilmer, and Tom Cruise were considered for the role of Hill. To prepare for the role, De Niro consulted with Pileggi, who had research material that had been discarded while writing the book. De Niro often called Hill several times a day to ask how Burke walked, held his cigarette, and so on. Driving to and from the set, Liotta listened to FBI audio cassette tapes of Hill, so that he could practice speaking like his real-life counterpart. Madonna was considered for the role of Karen Hill. To research her role, Lorraine Bracco tried to get close to a mob wife but was unable due to the insular nature of mafia communities. She decided not to meet the real Karen, saying that she thought it would be better if the creation came from me. Paul Sorvino had no problem finding the voice and walk of his character, but found it challenging to find what he called that kernel of coldness and absolute hardness that is antithetical to my nature except when my family is threatened. Former EDNY prosecutor Edward A. McDonald appeared in the film as himself, recreating the conversation that he had with Henry and Karen Hill about joining the Witness Protection Program. McDonald, who was friends with Pileggi, was cast on a whim. While a location scout was taking pictures of his office, McDonald casually remarked that he would be happy to play himself if needed. Pileggi called him an hour later asking if he was serious, and he was cast. The scene was unscripted, with McDonald improvising the line referring to Karen as a babe in the woods. The film was shot on location in Queens, upstate New York, New Jersey, and parts of Long Island during spring and summer 1989, with a budget of $25 million. According to Scorsese, shooting wrapped up in August 14. Scorsese broke the film into sequences and storyboarded everything because of the complicated style throughout. The filmmaker stated, "Wanted lots of movement and I wanted it to be throughout the whole picture, and I wanted the style to kind of break down by the end, so that by last day as a wise guy, it's as if the whole picture would be out of control, give the impression he's just going to spin off the edge and fly out." He added that the film's style came from the opening scenes of Jules and Jim, extensive narration, quick edits, freeze frames and multiple locale switches. It is this reckless attitude toward convention that mirrors the attitude of many of the gangsters in the film. Scorsese remarked, "So if you do the movie, you say, I don't care if there's too much narration. Too many quick cuts, that's too bad. It's that kind of really punk attitude we're trying to show." He adopted a frenetic style to almost overwhelm the audience with images and information. He also put plenty of detail in every frame because he believed that the gangster life is so rich. Freeze frames were used for certain scenes because Scorsese wanted to highlight that a point was being reached in Henry's life. Joe Pesci did not judge his character, but found that the scene in which he kills Spider hard to do until he forced himself to feel the way Tommy did. Bracco found the shoot to be an emotionally difficult one because of the male-dominated cast, and realized that if she did not make her work important, it would probably end up on the cutting room floor. When it came to the relationship between Henry and Karen, Bracco saw no difference between an abused wife and her character. According to Pesci, improvisation and ad-libbing came out of rehearsals wherein Scorsese let the actors do whatever they wanted. He made transcripts of these sessions, took the lines that the actors came up with that he liked best, and put them into a revised script from which the cast worked during principal photography. For example, the scene in which Tommy tells a story and Henry is responding to him, the funny "How do I amuse you?" scene is based on an actual event that Pesci experienced. Pesci was working as a waiter when he thought that he was making a compliment to a mobster by saying he was funny. However, the comment was not taken well. It was worked on in rehearsals at which he and Liotta improvised, and Scorsese recorded 4 to 5 takes, rewrote their dialogue and inserted it into the script. The dinner scene with Tommy's mother, portrayed by Scorsese's mother Catherine, was also improvised, with the only scripted line being, "Did Tommy tell you about my painting?" Tommy's mother's painting of the bearded man with the dogs was painted by Nicholas Pileggi's mother and based on a photograph from the November 1978 edition of National Geographic magazine. The cast did not meet Henry Hill until a few weeks before the film's premiere. Liotta met him in an undisclosed city. Hill had seen the film and told the actor that he loved it. The long tracking shot through the Copacabana nightclub came about because of a practical problem. The filmmakers could not get permission to go in the short way, and this forced them to go round the back. Scorsese decided to film the sequence in one unbroken shot to symbolize that Henry's entire life was ahead of him, commenting, "It's his seduction of her Karen and it's also the lifestyle seducing him." This sequence was shot 8 times because Henny Youngman messed up his lines. Henry's last day as a criminal was the hardest part of the film for Scorsese to shoot because he wanted to properly show Henry's state of anxiety and paranoia caused by cocaine and amphetamine use. In an interview with film critic Mark Cousins, Scorsese explained the reason for Pesci shooting at the camera at the end of the film. "Well, that's a reference right to the end of The Great Train Robbery, and basically the plot of this picture is very similar to The Great Train Robbery. It hasn't changed. 90 years later, it's the same story. The gunshots will always be there. He's always going to look behind his back. He's gotta have eyes behind his back, because they're gonna get him someday." The director ended the film with Henry regretting that he is no longer a wise guy, about which Scorsese said that, "I think the audience should get angry at him and I would hope they do, and maybe with the system which allows this." Scorsese wanted to depict the film's violence realistically, cold, unfeeling and horrible. Almost incidental. However, he had to remove 10 frames of blood to ensure an R rating from the MPAA. Goodfellas was Scorsese's most expensive film to that point, but still a medium-sized budget by Hollywood standards. It is also the first time that he was obliged by Warner Brothers to preview the film. At 2 preview screenings in California, audiences were agitated by the sequence depicting Henry's final day as a gangster, which Scorsese argued was his and editor Thelma Schoonmaker's intention. In the first test screening, 40 audience members walked out in the first 10 minutes. One of the favorite scenes for test audiences was the "funny like a clown? Do I amuse you?" scene. Although there is no incidental score in the film, Scorsese chose songs for the soundtrack that he felt obliquely commented on the scene or the characters. In any given scene, he used only music contemporary to or older than the scene setting. According to Scorsese, many of the non-dialogue scenes were shot to playback. For example, he had Layla by Derek and the Dominoes playing on the set while shooting the scene in which the dead bodies are discovered in the car, dumpster, and meat truck. Sometimes, the lyrics of songs were inserted between lines of dialogue to comment on the action. Some of the music Scorsese had written into the script, while other songs he discovered during the editing phase. Goodfellas premiered at the 47th Venice International Film Festival, where Scorsese received the Silver Lion Award for Best Director. It was given a wide release in North America on September 21, 1990. Goodfellas was released on DVD in March 1997, in a single disc, double-sided, single-layer format that requires the disc to be flipped during viewing. In 2004, Warner Home Video released a 2-disc, dual-layer version, with remastered picture and sound, and bonus materials such as commentary tracks. In early 2007, the film became available on single Blu-ray with all the features from the 2004 release. An expanded Blu-ray version was released on February 16, 2010, for its 20th anniversary, bundled with a disc with features that include the 2008 documentary Public Enemies, The Golden Age of the Gangster Film. On May 5, 2015, a 25th anniversary edition was released. The film was released on 4K Ultra HD Blu-ray on December 6, 2016. The 25th anniversary release and subsequent releases include a Merry Melodies and Looney Tunes collection with the shorts I Like Mountain Music, 1933, She Was an Acrobat's Daughter, 1937, Racketeer Rabbit, 1946, and Bugs and Thugs, 1954. Goodfellas grossed $6.3 million from 1,070 theaters in its opening weekend, topping the box office. In its second weekend, the film made $5.9 million from 1,291 theaters, falling just 8% and finishing second behind newcomer Pacific Heights. It went on to make $46.8 million domestically. According to review aggregator Rotten Tomatoes, 94% of 166 critics have given the film a positive review, with an average rating of 9.00/10. The website's critics' consensus reads, "Hard-hitting and stylish, Goodfellas is a gangster classic and arguably the high point of Martin Scorsese's career." Metacritic has assigned the film a weighted average score of 92 out of 100, based on reviews from 21 critics, indicating universal acclaim. Audiences polled by CinemaScore gave the film an average grade of A on a scale of A+ to F. In his review for the Chicago Sun-Times, Roger Ebert gave the film a full 4 stars and wrote, "No finer film has ever been made about organized crime, not even The Godfather." In his review for the Chicago Tribune, Gene Siskel wrote, "All of the performances are first-rate, Pesci stands out, though, with his seemingly unscripted manner. Goodfellas is easily one of the year's best films." Both critics named it the best film of 1990. In his review for the New York Times, Vincent Canby wrote, "More than any earlier Scorsese film, Goodfellas is memorable for the ensemble nature of the performances. The movie has been beautifully cast from the leading roles to the bits. There is flash also in some of Mr. Scorsese's directorial choices, including freeze frames, fast cutting and the occasional long tracking shot. None of it is superfluous." USA Today gave the film 4 stars out of 4, and called it great cinema and also a whopping good time. David Anson, in his review for Newsweek magazine, wrote, "Every crisp minute of this long, teeming movie vibrates with outlaw energy." Rex Reed said, "Big, rich, powerful and explosive. One of Scorsese's best films. Goodfellas is great entertainment." In his review for Time, Richard Corliss wrote, "So it is Scorsese's triumph that Goodfellas offers the fastest, sharpest 2½ HR ride in recent film history." The film is ranked the best of 1990 by Roger Ebert, Gene Siskel, and Peter Travers. In a poll of 80 film critics, Goodfellas was named the best film of the year by 34 critics. Director Martin Scorsese was chosen as the year's best director in 45 of the 80 ballots. Goodfellas is ranked number 92 on the AFI's 100 Years, 100 Movies, 10th Anniversary Edition list, published in 2007. In 2012, the Motion Picture Editors Guild listed Goodfellas as the 15th best edited film of all time based on a survey of its membership. In the 2012 Sight and Sound polls, it was ranked the 48th greatest film ever made in the director's poll. In the subsequent 2022 polls, it was ranked 28th in the director's poll and tied for 63rd, with Casablanca and The Third Man, in the critics' poll. Goodfellas is 39th on James Berardinelli's 2014 made list of the top 100 films of all time. In 2014, What Culture included Joe Pesci's role in top 10 most convincing movie psychopath performances. In 2015, Goodfellas ranked 20th on BBC's 100 Greatest American Films list, voted on by film critics from around the world. The February 2020 issue of New York Magazine lists Goodfellas as among the best movies that lost Best Picture at the Oscars. Goodfellas is number 94 on the American Film Institute's 100 Years, 100 Movies list and moved up to number 92 on its AFI's 100 Years, 100 Movies, 10th Anniversary Edition, from 2007. In June 2008, the AFI put Goodfellas at number 2 in the gangster category on their AFI's 10 Top 10 The Best 10 Films in 10 Classic American Film Genres after polling over 1,500 people from the movie-related community. Goodfellas was regarded as the second best in the gangster film genre, after The Godfather. In 2000, the United States Library of Congress deemed the film culturally significant and selected it for preservation in the National Film Registry. Roger Ebert named Goodfellas the best mob movie ever and placed it among the 10 best films of the 1990s. In December 2002, a UK film critics poll in Sight and Sound ranked the film number 4 on their list of the 10 best films of the last 25 years. Time included Goodfellas in their list of Time's all-time 100 movies. Channel 4 placed Goodfellas at number 10 in their 2002 poll The 100 Greatest Films. Empire listed Goodfellas at number 6 on their 500 Greatest Movies of All Time, and Total Film voted Goodfellas number 1 as the greatest film of all time. In 2006, Writers Guild of America West ranked its screenplay 41st in UGA's list of 101 greatest screenplays. Premiere listed Joe Pesci's Tommy DeVito as number 96 on its list of the 100 greatest movie characters of all time, calling him perhaps the single most irredeemable character ever put on film. Empire ranked Tommy DeVito number 59 in their The 100 Greatest Movie Characters poll. The film's 2.5-minute tracking shot through the Copacabana nightclub, colloquially called the Copa shot, is widely considered one of the greatest shots of all time, and is one of the few shots in the history of cinema readily identifiable by name. It is credited with popularizing the use of long Steadicam tracking shots in future productions, including Pulp Fiction, Boogie Nights, The Place Beyond the Pines, and the Buffy the Vampire Slayer episode The Body. An apparent homage to the scene appears in the 2025 film Melania, as the President and First Lady navigate service hallways to exit their final inaugural ball, set to the same Crystals tune. Goodfellas inspired director David Chase to make the HBO television series The Sopranos. He told Peter Bogdanovich, "Goodfellas is a very important movie to me and Goodfellas really plowed that. I found that movie very funny and brutal and it felt very real. And yet that was the first mob movie that Scorsese ever dealt with a mob crew. As opposed to say The Godfather, which there's something operatic about it, classical, even the clothing and the cars. You know, I always think about Goodfellas when they go to their mother's house that night when they're eating, you know, when she brings out her painting, that stuff is great. The Sopranos learned a lot from that." Indeed, the film shares a total of 27 actors with The Sopranos, including Bracco, Sirico, Imperioli, Pellegrino, Lip, and Vincent, who all had roles in Chase's HBO series. July 24, 2010, marked the 20th anniversary of the film's release. The milestone was celebrated with Henry Hill hosting a private screening for a select group of invitees at the Museum of the American Gangster in New York City. In January 2012, it was announced that the AMC network put a television series version of the movie in development. Pileggi was on board to co-write the adaptation with television writer and producer Jorge Zamacona. In 2015, Goodfellas closed the Tribeca Film Festival with a screening of its 25th anniversary remaster. In 2020, AMC began including a content warning when airing Goodfellas. This film includes language and or cultural stereotypes that are inconsistent with today's standards of inclusion and tolerance and may offend some viewers. By comparison, The Godfather gets a standard viewer discretion warning. That early line in Martin Scorsese's Goodfellas, spoken by its protagonist, Henry Hill, played to fiery perfection by Ray Liotta, sets in motion the ensuing marathon of compartmentalization. It begs the question, why does Henry want to be a gangster? When he speaks this first line of his almost omnipresent narration, the situation is precarious. He and two fellow wise guys, Tommy DeVito, Joe Pesci, and Jimmy Conway, Robert De Niro, have pulled off the road to check a noise from the trunk. A maid guy, supposedly untouchable, writhes in the back, clinging to life. Tommy delivers a few heated blows with a kitchen knife, and Jimmy finishes the job with 4 gunshots, putting their victim out of his misery, all of them bathed in hellfire red from the rear lights of the car. Later, they will bury their victim. After 6 months, they will have to move the decomposing corpse to another location, prompting Henry to vomit violently while his compatriots crack jokes. Given miserable circumstances like these, one should again ask, why does Henry want to be a gangster? Throughout the film, he remarks on the power and freedoms of the wise guy lifestyle, and the breakneck filmmaking conveys the associated euphoria. Scorsese portrays Henry's world through an immersion in his subjectivity, a first-hand testimony rendered with an infectious energy and style. All the while, Henry conveniently ignores or suppresses the grim realities and the many contradictions between his métier and the way he talks about that world. Upon its release in 1990, a similar effect spread among viewers like an infection. Many critics questioned whether Scorsese was endorsing or glorifying the mafia's behavior. At the same time, superfans hung Goodfellas posters on their walls, looking upon the 3 floating, imposing leads and admiring their "we take shit from no one" expressions. Just as Henry doesn't seem able to confront oppositional ideas about his lifestyle that the criminal organization he romanticizes might not be the bastion of personal freedom and solidarity that he claims, many viewers misread the film's mordant humor, crackling pace, and criminal milieu as a male fantasy. But Scorsese and fellow screenwriter Nicholas Pileggi, author of the 1985 nonfiction book Wise Guy, Life in a Mafia Family, which provided the foundation for the screen story, did not set out to thrill and convert their audience to Henry's criminal lifestyle. They wanted to seduce and then infuriate viewers. Scorsese intended to portray the half-Irish, half-Italian Henry Hill and his beloved Italian mafiosos as corrupt, hypocritical, and alternately horrific and funny, so the viewer would understand what Henry found so attractive about this world. But they also intended to portray gangsterism as a miserable, stressful, and, in the end, thankless existence. With how frequently reactions to Goodfellas go against what the director intended, it's worth questioning whether Scorsese succeeded in his artistic ambitions. However, this is a recurring trend in the responses to Scorsese's work, which regularly immerses audiences in self-contained worlds of toxic masculinity and amoral behavior, and underscores how many moviegoers struggle to engage with and interpret a text. Going back to Mean Streets, 1973, following low-level street thugs on a reckless path of self-destruction, Scorsese has consistently implanted spectators in his characters' subjectivity while never moralizing or offering polemical repudiation of their behavior. In many ways, Mean Streets uses the same narrative and formal techniques as Goodfellas to achieve its effect, including a similar bathing of characters in red light, a familiar blend of levity and toxicity, and a main character who compartmentalizes his criminality. Though Harvey Keitel's Charlie at least feels Catholic guilt about his crimes, he seeks to atone physically, holding his finger over a flame to feel the pain of hell. Charlie remarks, "The pain in hell has 2 sides. The kind you can touch with your hand, the kind you can feel in your heart, your soul, the spiritual side. And you know, the worst of the 2 is the spiritual." Although Charlie grapples with the morality of his life, Henry shows no such regret in Goodfellas. Take when Henry seems shocked after Tommy impulsively shoots Spider, Michael Imperiali, but he doesn't object on moral grounds or lose sleep over what happened. Such unquestioning acceptance of this lifestyle has led to a debate about what message Scorsese intends to impart. Scorsese told Stephen Colbert that he sought to depict the glamour of evil with Goodfellas. His artistic goal is to understand the world from within it. What often makes Scorsese's pictures initially so divisive is also what makes them venerable works of art. They confront, entertain, and require the audience to read them. Scorsese admitted to critic David Ehrenstein, "I want to provoke the audience. Like in Goodfellas. What these people do is morally wrong, but the film doesn't say that." Scorsese's commitment to provocation often comes into question, inciting a brand of aesthetic discourse that goes back to Plato's arguments in The Republic about art being mere imitations that cannot grasp the truth and only represent the face value. Of course, aesthetic theorists have countered Plato, placing the role of interpretation on the viewer. More than most filmmakers, Scorsese's pictures require much from his audience, sometimes to the film's detriment. For instance, Scorsese's complete absorption into the mind of Travis Bickle is what made Taxi Driver, 1976, compelling, and the film's message remains a regular topic of debate, along with its portrait of a racist main character and its effect on its audience. Just ask John Hinckley Jr., whose obsession with the film and its star Jodie Foster led to an assassination attempt on Ronald Reagan in 1981. More recently, Scorsese's look at duplicitous, hard-partying brokers in The Wolf of Wall Street, 2013, tested the limits of many viewers. Read Esther Zuckerman's article in The Atlantic. The Wolf of Wall Street is a douchebag's handbook who could not interpret for themselves that the filmmaker did not sanction the debauchery, hedonism, and duplicity shown in the film. Scorsese resists wagging his finger at his characters or openly decrying their behavior. He respects his audience too much to resort to moralizing and assumes they can interpret his message without his having to spell it out. And while each reviewer or spectator is entitled to their interpretation, some might do better to attempt to understand what Scorsese was going for. Indeed, even as Scorsese tells stories about criminal behavior, his initial interest in these characters stems from how they rationalize their lives. He shows characters such as Henry Hill in Deadly Organizations, compartmentalizing their sanctimoniousness and criminality in favor of the personal benefits their worlds supply. In Mean Streets, a faith-based exchange occurs in which Keitel's Charlie hopes his physical self-punishment will be enough to atone for his street crimes. However, the thought of leading a moral life to end his internal conflict never occurs to him. The examples throughout Scorsese's career persist into The Irishman, 2019, and Killers of the Flower Moon, 2023. The former features a passive De Niro as a mob hitman who never questions why he kills because, like in World War II, his need to follow orders and do the prescribed thing negates any sense of his internal morality, which emerges tragically late. In the latter film, compartmentalization allows Leonardo DiCaprio's dullard to go along with a plot to murder the Osage people for their oil money despite loving his wife, an Osage woman whose family he has preyed upon. However frequently these themes appear in Scorsese's filmography, they had not been present in his work for some time before Goodfellas. When discussions about adapting Pileggi's book began in the mid-1980s, Scorsese's career floundered in a decade of commercial gambles and creative transition. While spending much of the 1980s attempting to get The Last Temptation of Christ, 1988, made, he explored other genres. He took director-for-hire jobs that gave him the freedom to experiment, resulting in some of his most inventive work on The King of Comedy, 1982, and After Hours, 1985, while elsewhere he earned commercial success with The Color of Money, 1986. Still, he was uniquely suited to the subject matter of Wise Guy, having witnessed the gangster lifestyle in his youth. His Italian-American upbringing in New York's Little Italy neighborhood featured gangsters as part of the natural environment. Even his best friend during childhood was a mobster's son. Better than any other filmmaker, Scorsese could understand how someone could be drawn into the gangster lifestyle, extolling its perks while subjecting themselves to its dangers. Still, after Mean Streets and Raging Bull, 1980, Scorsese had wanted to move on from mobsters, yet he couldn't help but appreciate Pileggi's honest and romance-free depiction of that world. Pileggi started out as a journalist covering crime for the Associated Press in 1956 and became New York Magazine's resident crime expert in 1968. A native of Brooklyn's Bensonhurst neighborhood, Pileggi grew up around Italian-American gangsters and earned a reputation among them as a respectable neighborhood guy, so he knew that world well. His book Wise Guy would mark the first time a mobster told all without coercion or government pressure. The real Henry Hill defied his contacts at the FBI and the U.S. Marshals overseeing his placement in the Witness Security Program, WITSEC, by giving Pileggi his number through an attorney. But Scorsese wouldn't be the first filmmaker to tackle Hill's story, despite reading the book in 1986 and immediately wanting to buy the rights to adapt it. Around that time, Pileggi had been dating Nora Ephron, and they would eventually marry in 1987. Ephron's fascination with mobsters extends from her screenplay for Susan Seidelman's mob comedy Cookie, 1989, to her many references to The Godfather, 1972, in her romantic comedy You've Got Mail, 1998. Ephron also wrote the mob comedy My Blue Heaven, 1990, which opened a month before Goodfellas and follows a Henry Hill-like gangster, Vinnie Antonelli, played by Steve Martin, whose time as a schnook in witness protection finds him pining for arugula and building a baseball park in his new San Diego suburb home. After securing the screen rights to Wise Guy, Scorsese would finish making The Last Temptation of Christ before moving on to what would eventually become Goodfellas. The title had to be changed due to a mob-themed television show called Wise Guy, which debuted in 1987 and ran until 1990. The film's production landed at Warner Brothers, an appropriate home given the studio's reputation for gangster movies during the golden age of Hollywood. Classics such as The Public Enemy, 1931, Little Caesar, 1931, Angels with Dirty Faces, 1938, and The Roaring Twenties, 1939, adopted a ripped-from-the-headlines approach to Prohibition-era gangsterism. Scorsese would deploy a similar style to Goodfellas, drawing from TV tabloid journalism and documentary aesthetics to consider the anthropology of low-level soldiers in the Italian-American mob. The production's striking verisimilitude became one of its most enduring hallmarks, accented by the involvement of Hill and many other actual gangsters. Casting director Ellen Lewis even found roles for several real-life mobsters, adding to the film's warm reception in their circles. In GQ's oral history to celebrate the film's 20th anniversary, Pileggi remarks, "Mob guys love it, because it's the real thing, and they knew the people in it. They say, it's like a home movie. However, it's far from a quasi-documentary, as scholar Fulvio Orsito claims." Goodfellas tells the story of Henry Hill, starting with his modest Brooklyn childhood in the 1950s and his admiration for the freedom and power of the Cicero family gangsters in his neighborhood, headed by Paul Sorvino. After landing a job with them as a gopher, he enters their ranks as a teenage petty criminal. Getting accepted into their fold means Henry will be somebody in a neighborhood full of nobodies, he observes in his narration, which sounds like witness testimony upon reflection of the film's courtroom finish. Indeed, Henry recalls his role in the organization over the next 2.5 decades, from joining Jimmy and Tommy on heists and shakedowns to starting up a cocaine side hustle. Meanwhile, he marries a Jewish woman from the neighborhood, Karen, Lorraine Bracco, and has 2 kids, which never prevents him from carrying on with a girlfriend, Janice, Gina Mastrogiacomo, or his eventual drug cutter, Sandy, Debbie Mazar. Although Henry will never be a full member of the Italian crew due to his Irish blood, Tommy can still be made. It's a big moment for Henry and Jimmy when that's set to happen. But the bosses whack Tommy instead, payback for the unauthorized killing of a made man, Billy Batts, Frank Vincent, the guy from the trunk. Despite robberies and assaults on his list of crimes, cocaine, which Paulie warns him not to mess with, eventually brings Henry down. His capture prompts him to turn over his so-called family members and disappear into WITSEC to some anonymous suburban purgatory. The events in Goodfellas are less important than the flavor of realism and personal reflection with which Scorsese presents them. Certainly, its iconic scenes have been fixed in the lexicon of great movie moments, inspiring countless homages. Even people who have never seen the film know the "How am I funny" scene, spoofed most memorably in the Goodfellas segments on TV's Animaniacs, 1993 to 1998, featuring a Pesci-esque pigeon with a temper. However, the events in Henry's life prove secondary to the general portraiture of his world. Consider how much time Henry spends discussing the planning and aftermath of the famous Lufthansa heist, which has been the subject of several books and movies. Yet, Henry was not there. And in keeping with the film's structure as a cinematic rendering of Henry's, and to a lesser degree Karen's, recollections, Scorsese does not show what occurred at the airline. The film serves as a statement of the facts as Henry and Karen see them, given either as witness testimony, personal accounts to Pilecki, or true confessions to the viewer. In keeping with the non-fiction source material, Scorsese is committed to realism in Goodfellas. Production designer Christy Zia oversaw the obsessive attention to every detail insisted on by Scorsese, Pilecki, and the actors, the Italian fabrics imported for the costumes, the faux commercial for Maury's, Chuck Lowe, toupee business, modeled after the real thing, the vintage watches in the actors' pockets, which never see screen time, the real rolled-up wad of cash De Niro kept on him during the shoot. And yet, the production's attention to journalistic detail throughout Goodfellas serves Scorsese's ambition to deconstruct gangster cinema, using what scholar Larissa M. Ennis identifies as irony, direct address, and wry juxtapositions between the voice-over narration and the visual content of the film to recast the genre in a new light. Scorsese's style creates a critical distance that reminds the viewer they're watching a movie while simultaneously immersing them in Henry's world. This is the real magic trick of Goodfellas. Like Scorsese's earlier work, especially Mean Streets, the director employs visual and oral techniques derived from French New Wave directors such as François Truffaut and Jean-Luc Godard. When Scorsese and Pilecki first started to prepare their script, the director showed him Truffaut's Jules Et Jim, 1962, to demonstrate what he wanted regarding voiceover and still images. What I loved about these Truffaut and Godard techniques from the early 60s was that the narrative was not that important, Scorsese remarked. The narrative flow could pause for a freeze frame or an aside, interrupting the story proper to make a tangential point. Tabloid television programs such as Hard Copy and A Current Affair use comparable devices that, by association, add to the film's expository quality. Similarly, the voiceover might come from multiple sources, such as when Karen remarks about Henry's rude behavior on their first date or meeting too many Pauls, Peters, and Marys at their wedding reception. Along with a fourth wall-breaking finale, the film's variety of techniques creates an almost Brechtian effect that underscores the cinematic medium. Scorsese's use of new wave methods enlivens Henry's account of his gangster lifestyle, but it also underlines incongruities between what Henry tells us and what the film shows us. Note how Henry lumps everyone else into the category of suckers. To us, those goody-good people who worked shitty jobs for bum paychecks and took the subway to work every day, and worried about their bills, were dead. By contrast, anything I wanted was a phone call away. But Henry and the other gangsters live in tacky houses, their wives wear cheap clothes and bad makeup, according to Karen, and they put their lives at risk to maintain this unimpressive facade and acquire the little extras for their families. Our husbands weren't brain surgeons, Karen admits. They were blue-collar guys. The only way they could make extra money, real extra money, was to go out and cut a few corners. But anyone living too extravagantly risks attracting unwanted attention, and if the authorities don't get them first, someone else on the crew will whack them for conspicuous spending. Several members of Jimmy's crew meet this fate after the Lufthansa heist when he attempts to shield himself from suspicion by eliminating anyone else involved. Yet, being part of a crew is supposed to mean that nobody can fuck around with you, according to Henry. It also means you could fuck around with anybody just as long as they aren't also a member. This is proven false as well. Case in point, Billy Bats. Meanwhile, Henry faces discrimination in his Italian-American gangster family's social order. His highest possible role as a mob soldier is determined by his half-Irish ethnicity, which plays a central role in the Cicero family power structure, where only pure-blooded Sicilians can become made men. This fact emphasizes how Henry will forever be a pilot fish in the mob, swimming behind the bigger sharks, picking up scraps. Jimmy and Tommy, the latter being full Italian, have more cred within the family than Henry does, though Jimmy, too, is part Irish. Henry's status as a relative outsider, however, allows him to observe from a distance and report, which makes his film Long Testimony so authentic, and the real Henry such a good subject, according to Pilecki. But ethnicity also reveals another dimension to the deplorable behavior in Goodfellas, whose characters have all manner of nasty things to say about anyone who's not a straight male of Italian blood, especially people of color. This is nothing new in Scorsese's cinema. Mean Streets features Keitel's character pining after a black dancer he's socially forbidden to desire. De Niro's Travis Bickle targets black people with violence in Taxi Driver, and his Jake LaMotta in Raging Bull transfers his many frustrations onto his black nemesis Sugar Ray Robinson. The wise guys in Goodfellas reinforce their group identity by treating blackness as subhuman, with Tommy questioning his girlfriend when she praises Sammy Davis, Jr., saying, "I could see how a white girl could fall for him." Tommy responds in his typical manner by making a scene, asking, "So you condone that stuff?" The examples of such behavior have inspired analyses of race in the film, but suffice it to say, it's another aspect of Henry's world that remains appalling, yet he accepts it. Being a gangster isn't a license to do anything, despite Henry's claim. Instead, it's better described as an alternative lifestyle that operates in ways that create the illusion of control. When the system fails, gangsterism provides protection for people who can't go to the cops, Henry argues. It supplies a feeling of defiance against traditional lifestyles for people who might not cut it in the real world, and so they undercut, steal, intimidate, and murder to get their way, creating a world on their terms. Henry proudly affirms, "I was part of something. I belonged." And while Henry remains uncritical of this world and its morality, Karen is more aware of her conflicted feelings about her husband's gangster lifestyle, showing more evidence of cognitive dissonance than her husband. "I know there are women, like my best friends, who would have gotten out of there the minute their boyfriend gave them a gun to hide. But I didn't. I got to admit the truth. It turned me on. Even so, there are rules to this world, as in the conventional law-abiding world, and the punishments prove even more severe. Get out of line, and you might get whacked. Are the risks worth the rewards?" For Henry, it seems so. Still, in his book about the film, Made Men, The Story of Goodfellas, critic Glenn Kenny observes, it never occurs to Henry that he may have traded a leash for a noose. But there was never a trade for Henry. He entered this life as a kid, with his parents providing his only exposure to a normal lifestyle. Henry has never worked a straight day in his life, so there's hardly a comparison or moral framework for Henry to judge his life against. When he's eventually caught and giving testimony from the courtroom in the final scene, he does not regret his actions, he can only mourn the loss of his freedoms. "I'm an average nobody. I get to live the rest of my life like a schnook." Even though Henry's world contains contradictions, prejudice, and danger that arguably negate its freedom, Scorsese's whirlwind aesthetic captures its addictive high, where distortion, hyperbole, and exuberance all commingle, as Pauline Kael notes in her New Yorker review. Kael argued the film is a male fantasy, claiming it's about being a guy and guys getting high on being a guy. To be sure, the visual bravado Scorsese brings to this picture captivated many viewers while conveying Henry's enthusiasm for mob life, from the famous one-shot Steadicam sequence through the Copacabana to the many Rompe-ish episodes where crime pays off. The sheer virtuosity with which every scene arrives and folds into the next makes the 149-minute runtime feel about half that. It's a testament to Scorsese's longtime collaboration with editor Thelma Schoonmaker, whose rhythms, pauses, and interruptions move in harmony with the nimble brio of Michael Ballhaus' superb cinematography. And then Scorsese, serving as his own music supervisor, layers each scene with music that adds another energetic dimension. The director had worked out what songs he wanted in the film during the scripting phase, noting soundtrack choices in the initial screenplay from Cream's guitar riff on Sunshine of Your Love to accent Jimmy's deadly presence, to Donovan's Atlantis to underscore the mythical sinking of Henry, Tommy, and Jimmy as they attack Bats for insulting Tommy and telling him, "Now go home and get your fucking shine box." Getting swept up in this perfect visual and oral storm is effortless, even though its collapse a frenzied 10-minute sequence set on May 11, 1980, involving a gun deal, a cocaine drop, some delicious-looking meat sauce, and justified paranoia about a helicopter looks nightmarish. Scorsese captures the essence of how being a gangster makes you feel alive, and, in Henry's case, cocaine heightens that even further. Henry's excitement throughout the film is laden with humor and crackles with the electricity of improvisations by the actors, especially Pesci, who manages to conjure laughter out of the most unlikely situations. The film's gallows humor can be infectious, though it's often contained within disturbing scenes, such as the amusing late-night dinner with Tommy's mother, Catherine Scorsese, the director's mother, a delightful presence intent on feeding her hungry guys and showing off her painting while Bats barely clings to the life in the car trunk just outside. Goodfellas constantly puts the viewer into situations that, on the surface, should be horrific, yet they prove entertaining and funny. They play on the razor's edge between exhilarating and scary, with the "How am I funny" scene serving as a synecdoche for the film's effect, dangerous and elated. Which is to say, that's how Henry sees his wise guy lifestyle. It's a constant influx of heightened stimulation from violence, power, sex, and drugs, and accented by Scorsese with rock and roll. When Goodfellas debuted in 1990, it arrived nearly 2 decades after Francis Ford Coppola's The Godfather, which inspired a strain of imitators and similarly staged epics, including Sergio Leone's Once Upon a Time in America, 1984, and David Mamet's Things Change, 1988. They treat the Italian mob as operatic and sometimes romanticize their behaviors with music from the old country and a general regality, the same brand of self-satisfaction that permeates Frank Sinatra's music. By contrast, Scorsese's film questions everything with its grimy realism and none of the myth-making found in Coppola's film, which, many forget, presents a damning critique of American capitalism. Since Scorsese's film is not a grand dramaturgy but a personal testimony, he punctuates Goodfellas with a startling shot of Tommy, dressed in an outfit he wore earlier when robbing a truck, facing the camera and shooting a pistol at the audience in homage to the 1904 Western short The Great Train Robbery, in which an outlaw does the same. The final shot shows Henry returning to his Witsec home after receiving the paper, dressed in an unflattering light blue robe. On the soundtrack, the Sex Pistols cover of Sinatra's My Way blares in self-destructive rebellion, echoing the volatility of the band's frontman, Sid Vicious, who died at 21 after a brief but frenzied life of drugs, violence, and attitude. Henry is just as unapologetic about his choices. The lyrics regrets "I've had a few / but then again, too few to mention / I did what I had to do / I saw it through without exemption" couldn't be more appropriate, nor could the song choice be a parallel to Goodfellas' punkish status in the gangster genre at that time. Today, the film's legacy cannot be overstated. It's regularly hailed as the director's best work, and many publications and list makers have ranked it the greatest mob movie ever made. Scorsese has returned to the organized crime well a few times since, with 1995's Casino sharing the most in common with Goodfellas. Scorsese redeemed with Pileggi to tell the story planned for the author's book, Casino, Love and Honor in Las Vegas. The two once again collaborated on the script, which was completed before the book's publication, while De Niro, Pesci, and others from Goodfellas signed on to star. Many of them would return for The Irishman. But the film's reach extends to prestige television as well. David Chase, creator of HBO's The Sopranos, often considered the best television series ever made, admits he couldn't have conceived his show without Goodfellas. During its run, 1999 to 2007, The Sopranos became the benchmark for scripted television series in the 21st century, launching a slew of imitators, each about a complex white man who oversees a criminal organization, which is both appealing and morally corrupt. By extension, without Goodfellas, television shows such as Deadwood, Breaking Bad, Better Call Saul, Ozark, Boardwalk Empire, Peaky Blinders, Lilyhammer, Sons of Anarchy, Brotherhood, Gomorrah, and many others would probably not exist. More than any of its consequence, Goodfellas captures the pulse of gangster life, not just to understand what motivates these people and how they compartmentalize their choices, but to supply the audience with a shock treatment of aversion. In a persistent mode of seduction and repulsion, Scorsese balances Henry's testimony with the reality of his downfall. Henry may romanticize gangsterism, but the film does not. And while Scorsese uses a dichotomy of visual techniques, from splashing his characters in hellish reds or employing French New Wave devices, the film is not an expressive tragedy in the Greek tradition. Henry's downfall isn't so much tragic as it is earned. In her pen, Cale rightly observed that Goodfellas has no arc, and doesn't climax, it just comes to a stop. True enough, but that's not a flaw, it's an intentional strategy to confront the viewer. Henry had a slice of what he considers the good life. He did things his way and he lost it, having acted with impunity from the law and having betrayed the rules of his wise guy family. Scorsese tells a familiar gangster story, going back to the crime doesn't pay lessons characters played by James Cagney and Edward G. Robinson learned in 1930s gangster pictures. But Scorsese revives the genre with vibrant stylization and an entrenched perspective that seduces and, in doing so, entraps the audience as a provocateur might. Whether segments of the audience fall into the lure of Henry's world or, as intended, recoil from it, Goodfellas continues to exert its influence on anyone who encounters it. For as long as I've known, I wanted to study movies and understand what makes certain ones so great, and Goodfellas is one of those movies, one that carries a legendary status with it that can make someone like me slightly intimidated to look and review it. It's a very full movie with great characters and masterful direction that is definitely worth seeing multiple times, so you can catch everything, but it does hinder the first viewing with how full the movie is. Besides that, Goodfellas still stands as not only one of the best gangster movies of all time, but as an all-time classic period. Believe it or not, the story of Goodfellas is based off of true events, with slight variations on the source material, but apparently the movie holds very true to the original story as said by the real Henry Hill. It focuses on the rise of 3 generations of mafia family, but mainly the rise of Henry Hill, as he learns what it takes to become a gangster. His upcoming from small beginning is really interesting, and watching the life of crime consume him is even more so. His associates in Tommy Two Gun DeVito and Jimmy Conway are also interesting characters on their own, and it's the interactions between these 3 characters and how they work together that really makes you cheer and dislike them at the same time. There are points in the story where Henry gets to reflect on his upbringing, as he tries to keep his image and realizes the power of reputation, and the one that sticks out to me is the scene where the kid gets shot in the foot by Tommy, but I guarantee there's more that I missed. Speaking of things that I missed, the story is pretty packed and rewards multiple viewings, but I do feel it hurts the first time viewing experience of the movie. Keeping track of all the characters and all their motives can defiantly take a bit to sort out, but is worth it. The performances are outstanding with not a single weak performance among them. Ray Liotta plays the titular Henry Hill and he absolutely kills it. When an actor becomes that character and you no longer see that person as the actor, it's special and immerses you into the movie. His smooth personality can flip to pure anger and violence in an instant, whether he's with Karen Hill, played by Lorraine Bracco, or with his fellow gangsters, and he brings an intensity that almost makes his appearance of the smooth man seem like an act, and it shows in the scenes when he's angry at his wife. Speaking of the fellow gangsters, Joe Pesci gives one of his most iconic performances in the character of Tommy Two Guns DeVito, which won him an Oscar for Best Supporting Actor in 1990. He plays the unhinged nature of Tommy to a perfection, and it shows in his famous scene where he asks, "How am I funny?" as they go from laughing to extremely tense, and in the scene when he meets his old boss Jimmy Conway, played by Robert De Niro as the coolest of the gangsters, really shows his experience in the three generations as unlike the other two. He always has calm nature about him, even when slightly paranoid. Lorraine Bracco does a fine job with the thankless job of wife Karen Hill, and she has a couple really good scenes, but I feel she's crying most of the time and wish I saw a bit more from her character, but that's a writing thing. The direction by Martin Scorsese is absolutely masterful, as it drips with character and nuance that is benefited by multiple viewings, to truly appreciate the work put into the movie. The way Scorsese uses music and voiceover is great, even right at the beginning when Henry closes the trunk of the car and the jazz line starts, giving you this classy flair when he says, "For as long as I could remember, I wanted to be a gangster." The infamous one long tracking that follows Henry on a single take makes sense for the story, with the one in mind as Henry takes Karen to dinner and the camera never cuts as he introduces her to people and greets others, showing his control of a situation that might seem a little chaotic to Karen. That's not the only time he uses visual storytelling, as he does it with lighting and with certain thing in frame. A great example is when Karen meets with Jimmy, and as he's trying to get her to go into one of the stores, the camera goes to a wide and we can see signs pointing towards the store, saying one way and other things. There are so many things to unpack in this, I guarantee I missed some. Goodfellas is an iconic gangster film with extremely well realized group of characters, an excellent story dealing with the consumption of power and crime, outstanding performances, and a masterful vision from legendary director Martin Scorsese. The attention to detail is excellent, made all the more interesting by the fact that it's based on true events, with slight variations of course. It can be a little overwhelming on the first viewing, but will 100% benefit on rewatches to understand and catch just how much of a masterpiece this movie is. You can now keep up with movie reviews on Instagram by following Popcorn Business. Participate in polls, have say in future reviews and more. It's easy to remember the films that sparked your own love of film at one point of your life or another, and during my early teens, one of those films was none other than Martin Scorsese's Goodfellas. As an impressionable teenager who was pushing myself to watch more films in general, I remember first watching this on a television broadcast, and I've been watching it again and again every chance I had, whether it be on subsequent reruns or at my own home, to that point where every beat had been rooted so deeply in my head. And although it may not be my favorite Martin Scorsese film, it still encapsulates everything that I find to be what makes his work so wholly wonderful. Telling the story of Henry Hill, Ray Liotta, and his life within the mafia, Goodfellas starts on the most fitting note, with Hill driving together with Jimmy the Gent Conway, Robert De Niro, and the volatile Tommy DeVito, Joe Pesci, stopping by the side of the road, killing someone who has been stuffed into the trunk of their car. This is where Henry soon narrates, "As far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be a gangster." Detailing decades into his life, with his budding interest in joining the local mafia as a child to his climbing through the ranks as an adult, Goodfellas is a film that seduces one into this world, indulges into the feeling of taking part in a life of crime, before you witness everything spiraling out of control. It all seems to start so promisingly, when you first hear Henry Hill narrating his life about what it felt like to be a mobster. It pulls you into the criminal lifestyle, for it's a world that Martin Scorsese shows that he knows in and out, and it succeeds in making you feel everything that one would imagine from the glamorized life of being within the mafia. It feels great, it feels wonderful, but also wrecks you with guilt that follows you after the scope of the damage that has been done continues to hit you. It's a film that feels horrifying in that same sense it presents itself as highly delightful for one's own sensibilities to take in, because it simply felt good for Henry Hill to find people whom he felt he had belonged with. Scorsese makes you feel like you're part of a family the more you spend time with Henry Hill and his associates, as characters come into the story at a casual pace and are continually weaved throughout the film. At times funny, at times frightening, Goodfellas never lets up with encapsulating what it felt like to be a part of the mafia. Even the slightest interactions between every character feel almost like you're invited to become a part of their conversations too, but it also shows how much research have Scorsese and Nicholas Pileggi put into creating an accurate portrait of what it felt like to be a part of that lifestyle too. It soon comes down to the film bringing forth a subjective point of view through the narration of Henry Hill, clearly resentful of where he's come from, but from what he offers of what his life in the mafia had done to him on the whole, you still feel he has only lived a life of emptiness through and through. None of that glamour ever was anywhere near as true as it felt. Henry Hill's narration isn't the sole narration that carries the story forward, but his wife Karen, Lorraine Bracco, still plays an integral part in capturing that subjective perspective of the glamour within the mafia lifestyle. At first, she is shown to be resentful of the way in which Henry lives, but comes to be seduced into his own charms. Her perspective is never overshadowed by those of the men that surround her, but it's also one important part in emphasizing what it felt like to be around these people who have always carried clout with them, being able to find a sense of meaning wherever they went. As Scorsese shows his audiences, Karen is clearly in love with the glamour of the criminal lifestyle, but where she finds her place in Henry Hill's story is best summed up by the emptiness that comes forth, with betrayals hitting in one after the other. Of the many great American gangster movies that have been canonized all throughout film history, Goodfellas captures what it felt like to be within the moment unlike any other. This isn't so much a film all about one way of experiencing the mafia, despite telling a true story, but what makes it so wonderful comes the way in which it brings you into this world and plays around with you. Mixing dark humor with perfectly timed tension, Goodfellas still remains every bit as fresh as it was the first day I saw it as a teenager. It's without doubt one of Martin Scorsese's most entertaining movies, but also a work of brilliance from start to finish. With every revisit I always find myself taken aback by how much more I realize I love about it, and in my eyes it still remains one of the highest points of Martin Scorsese's large body of work. For 2 days after I saw Martin Scorsese's new film, Goodfellas, the mood of the characters lingered within me, refusing to leave. It was a mood of guilt and regret, of quick stupid decisions leading to wasted lifetimes, of loyalty turned into betrayal. Yet at the same time there was an element of furtive nostalgia, for bad times that shouldn't be missed, but were. Most films, even great ones, evaporate like mist once you've returned to the real world. They leave memories behind, but their reality fades fairly quickly. Not this film, which shows America's finest filmmaker at the peak of his form. No finer film has ever been made about organized crime, not even The Godfather, although the two works are not really comparable. Goodfellas, scheduled to open September 21 in Chicago, is a memoir of life in the mafia, narrated in the first person by Henry Hill, Ray Liotta, an Irish-Italian kid whose only ambition, from his earliest teens, was to be a wise guy, a mafioso. There is also narration by Karen, the Jewish girl, Lorraine Bracco, who married him, and who discovered that her entire social life was suddenly inside the mafia. Mob wives never went anywhere or talked to anyone who was not part of that world, and eventually, she says, the values of the mafia came to seem like normal values. She was even proud of her husband for not lying around the house all day, for having the energy and daring to go out and steal for a living. There is a real Henry Hill, who disappeared into the anonymity of the federal government's witness protection program, and who over a period of 4 years told everything he knew about the mob to the reporter Nicholas Pileggi, whose Wise Guy, Life in a Mafia Family was a bestseller. The screenplay by Pileggi and Scorsese distills those memories into a fiction that sometimes plays like a documentary, that contains so much information and feeling about the mafia that finally it creates the same claustrophobic feeling Hill's wife talks about, the feeling that the mob world is the real world. Scorsese is the right director, the only director, for this material. He knows it inside out. The great formative experience of his life was growing up in New York's Little Italy as an outsider who observed everything, an asthmatic kid who couldn't play sports, whose health was too bad to allow him to lead a normal childhood, who was often overlooked, but never missed a thing. There is a passage early in the film in which young Henry Hill looks out the window of his family's apartment and observes with awe and envy the swagger of the low-level wise guys in the social club across the street, impressed by the fact that they got girls, drove hot cars, had money, that the cops never gave them tickets, that even when their loud parties lasted all night, nobody ever called the police. That was the life he wanted to lead, the narrator tells us. The memory may come from Hill and maybe in Pileggi's book, but the memory also is Scorsese's, and in the 23 years I have known him, we have never had a conversation that did not touch at some point on that central image in his vision of himself, of the kid in the window, watching the neighborhood gangsters. Like The Godfather, Scorsese's Goodfellas is a long movie, with the space and leisure to expand and explore its themes. It isn't about any particular plot, it's about what it felt like to be in the mafia, the good times and the bad times. At first, they were mostly good times, and there is an astonishing camera movement in which the point of view follows Henry and Karen on one of their first dates, to the Copacabana nightclub. There are people waiting in line at the door, but Henry takes her in through the service entrance, past the security guards and the off-duty waiters, down a corridor, through the kitchen, through the service area and out into the front of the club, where a table is literally lifted into the air and placed in front of all the others so that the young couple can be in the first row for the floor show. This is power. Karen doesn't know yet exactly what Henry does. She finds out. The method of the movie is a slow expansion through levels of the mafia, with characters introduced casually and some of them not really developed until later in the story. We meet the Don Paul Cicero, Paul Sorvino, and Jimmy the Gent, Conway, Robert De Niro, a man who steals for the sheer love of stealing, and Tommy DeVito, Joe Pesci, a likable guy except that his fearsome temper can explode in a second, with fatal consequences. We follow them through 30 years, at first, through years of unchallenged power, then through years of decline, but they have their own kitchen in prison, and boxes of thick steaks and crates of wine, and then into betrayal and decay. At some point, the whole wonderful romance of the mafia goes sour for Henry Hill, and that moment is when he and Jimmy and Tommy have to bury a man whom Tommy kicked almost to death in a fit of pointless rage. First, they have to finish killing him. They stop at Tommy's mother's house to borrow a knife, and she feeds them dinner, then they bury him, then later they have to dig him up again. The worst part is, their victim was a made guy, a mafioso who is supposed to be immune. So they are in deep, deep trouble, and this is not how Henry Hill thought it was going to be when he started out on his life's journey. From the first shot of his first feature, Who's That Knocking at My Door? 1967, Scorsese has loved to use popular music as a counterpoint to the dramatic moments in his films. He doesn't simply compile a soundtrack of golden oldies, he finds the precise sound to underline every moment, and in Goodfellas, the popular music helps to explain the transition from the early days when Henry sells stolen cigarettes to guys at a factory gate, through to the frenetic later days when he's selling cocaine in disobedience of Paul Cicero's orders, and using so much of it himself that life has become a paranoid labyrinth. In all of his work, which has included arguably the best film of the 1970s, Taxi Driver, and of the 1980s, Raging Bull, Scorsese has never done a more compelling job of getting inside someone's head as he does in one of the concluding passages of Goodfellas, in which he follows one day in the life of Henry Hill, as he tries to do a cocaine deal, cook dinner for his family, placate his mistress and deal with the suspicion that he's being followed. This is the sequence that imprinted me so deeply with the mood of the film. It's not a straightforward narrative passage, and it has little to do with plot, it's about the feeling of walls closing in, and the guilty feeling that the walls are deserved. The counterpoint is a sense of duty, of compulsion, the drug deal must be made, but the kid brother also must be picked up, and the sauce must be stirred, and meanwhile, Henry's life is careening wildly out of control. Actors have a way of doing their best work, the work that lets us see them clearly, in a Scorsese film. Robert De Niro emerged as the best actor of his generation in Taxi Driver. Joe Pesci, playing De Niro's brother in Raging Bull, created a performance of comparable complexity. Both De Niro and Pesci are here in Goodfellas, essentially playing major and very challenging supporting roles to Ray Liotta and Lorraine Bracco, who establish themselves here as clearly two of our best new movie actors. Liotta was Melanie Griffith's late arriving, disturbingly dangerous husband in Something Wild, and here he creates the emotional center for a movie that is not about the experience of being a mafioso, but about the feeling. Bracco was the cop's wife from out in the suburbs in Someone to Watch Over Me, a film in which her scenes were so effective that it was with a real sense of loss that we returned to the main story. The sense of their marriage is at the heart of this film, especially in a shot where he clings to her, exhausted. They have made their lifetime commitment, and it was to the wrong life. The critical line of dialogue in Goodfellas isn't, I don't think, the pitch perfect as far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be a gangster. It sure as hell isn't I'm funny how, I mean funny like I'm a clown, I amuse you, one of those scenes that's perfectly fine and well done and has so completely ruined the way people talk about a great movie that I very much wish it didn't exist. The line I have in mind is a bit of voice-over narration delivered by Karen Friedman, Lorraine Bracco, after her future husband, Henry Hill, Ray Liotta, has pressed a blood pistol into her hands. I know there are women, like my best friends, who would have gotten out of there the minute their boyfriend gave them a gun to hide. But I didn't. I got to admit the truth. It turned me on. It turned me on. That, right there, is the beating heart and soul of Goodfellas, a gangster movie about gangster movies, and about the whole culture of gangster worship that stretches all the way back to Prohibition. It is, I would quite happily go so far to say, the best gangster movie, not the same thing as the best movie whose characters are gangsters, a title I'd reserve for Angels with Dirty Faces or White Heat or The Godfather and its first sequel. The best movie about who gangsters are, and how they came to exert such a magnetic pull on American culture. If you take the gangster to be the most, cynically, emblematic figure of the United States in the 20th century, as I tend to, selfish monsters of greed, willing to do any amount of violence to everybody who's not in their immediate sphere if it gives them a leg up, somehow coating this in a veneer of romanticism about individuality and personal honor that makes it seem admirable, what could be more all-American than that? Then Goodfellas is as close as it comes to the great American novel done as a movie. And of course, the great American novel would almost have to be a movie. It's based, relatively honestly as I understand it, on the life of Henry Hill, Ray Liotta, an Irish Sicilian kid from New York who idolized the local mobsters from the Lucky's family, and at a young age was able to ingratiate himself within the sphere of Paul Vario, Paulie Cicero in the film, where he's played by Paul Sorvino. Over the next 30-odd years, Hill snuggled into the world of organized crime, making an abbreviated stay in prison, and subsequently getting himself involved in drug dealing. It was this last crime that finally tripped him up, and got him in real trouble with the law. From here, knowing that his life was forfeit with the mob, he turned informer, sending a whole lot of mafiosi to prison, and entering witness protection. Insofar as somebody who spent the last quarter century of his life writing books, posing for photographs, and generally pitching himself as a celebrity could be plausibly stated to be keeping the low profile of a man in witness protection. One of the earliest books in the rise of Hill the ex-mobster celebrity was Wise Guy, Life in a Mafia Family, completed in 1986 by journalist Nicholas Pileggi. This book caught the eye of Martin Scorsese, who'd washed his hands of movies about Italian-American criminals, but found the epic story of Hill's rise and stumble so captivating that he worked with Pileggi to develop the book and Pileggi's unpublished research notes into a movie. Goodfellas was the result, but there's no trace of a crime reporter's non-fiction book to be found in the film's whirlwind first-person narrative, which mostly tracks Henry's own stream of consciousness recollection of the events of his life, almost entirely in chronological order, with a few interjections from his wife. And it very definitely needs those moments from Karen's perspective to work as splendidly as it does, taken solely from Henry's point of view, and Goodfellas might feel more of a beautiful tragedy, in which the glamorous life of an up-and-coming mobster is lost through the mania of ambition and replaced by the sullen world of a suburban dad. The film pays just enough attention to Karen's side of things that it becomes less about the allure of mob life to some Brooklyn kid who'd never amount to anything. It is, instead, about the allure of gangsters writ large in US culture, that curious blended desire for more and more, bigger and better stuff, clothes and houses and cars and sex, with the thrilling awareness of something evil and dark. I frankly think that Karen, not Henry, is the audience's identification point in all of this. He's our tour guide and chronicler, telling us what's happening in all of the film's episodic fragments and trying to contextualize it all within the past and future. Karen is the one on the outside, who sees all of the glitz and power, benefits from it, and knows that it's wrong, while simply not caring very much. And that, right there, is the whole of American pop culture's relationship to organized crime, isn't it? Jimmy Cagney is an abusive thug in The Public Enemy, but we root for him. The Corleones of The Godfather are savage monsters, but they dress well and have a nice home, and we admire them as the heroes of an operatic slice of costume drama Americana. Tony Montana in Scarface is a raving psychopath with virtually no appealing characteristics, but he's an icon in boys' dorm rooms across the nation. The key insight of Goodfellas is in recognizing this, and making it the thrust of the plot. But unlike all of those films, Goodfellas doesn't do much of anything to glamorous the life it depicts. It's a gangster movie where, no matter how charmingly Sorvino or Robert De Niro play them, the gangsters are still coiled up snakes, ready to strike. When violence hits in this movie, as it does routinely, it's never cool violence. It's usually shocking, swift, thuggish. And yes, I'm entirely aware that Goodfellas is wrapped up in the same gangsters are cool fan reception that I'm suggesting it's critiquing. Ultimately, I can't blame a movie for having stupid fans. A hugely important component of this, I am confident, is in the casting of Liotta as Henry Hill. I don't tend to love him as an actor, but he's more than capable of giving a good performance, and there's a way in which that's all Goodfellas asks of him. He is, in essence, the straight man to the florid world of the mafia, meant to be a bit colorless in comparison to all the figures surrounding him, most notably, of course, Joe Pesci's foul-mouthed lout Tommy DeVito, a great performance of a deadly dangerous character that has unfortunately been buried in parody. What Liotta's great at, even in his bad performances in bad movies, is suggesting an internal disorder verging on lunacy, but tamped down enough that you can see why other people in the movie don't notice it. The film draws this out to great effect in the climactic May 11, 1980, in which Liotta's face has been washed out by the makeup department to suggest the ass end of a weeks-long coke bender, while on the soundtrack the actor rattles through the laundry list of activities required of him that day in a sharp, annoyed tone. He is, in all ways, off-putting and upsetting, and if this is the way that the dreamed of gangster life turns out, who in their right mind would romanticize it? But even before that point, Liotta is never an attractive figure. He always seems like something is close to breaking. And that, more than anything else the film does, is what allows Goodfellas to put the light to the romance of the great American gangster. Who the hell wants to be Ray Liotta in this movie? Who wants to have him in their life? It's primarily this reason, I think, that Scorsese's The Wolf of Wall Street, practically a remake of this film *, doesn't work for me. Leonardo DiCaprio is alluring in all the ways Liotta is alarming, none of which is to say that Goodfellas is a tedious polemic, or any such thing. It's an unrelenting piece of filmmaking, maybe the most perfectly controlled of all Scorsese's films, certainly the best piece of editing in Thelma Schoonmaker's extraordinary career, if only for the hurtling way she throws together moments in that same May 11, 1980 sequence, letting the unpleasantly fast cutting and refusal to let scenes reach their appropriate stopping point to give us the same feeling of non-stop activity and exhaustion that Henry feels. If there is such a thing as the great cocaine sequence in cinema, I can't imagine that this isn't it. But it's not just the picture cutting that gives the sequence, and the film as a whole, its propulsion. The film uses music extremely well, letting a collection of songs from 50s lounge music to 70s classic rock to set the scene, to comment on the action through the smirking use of lyrics, which, I'll be honest, feels a little beneath Scorsese at this point in his career, and most importantly, to provide a rhythm that the visual editing and narrative action always seem hypnotized into matching. I'm not terribly fond of the film's famous Steadicam shot, into a nightclub through a crowded kitchen. It's showing off rather than contributing much to the mood, character, or plot, but it would be a complete disavowal of the power of cinema if I didn't acknowledge the way the shot is paced and segmented by the use of "Then He Kissed Me" by the Crystals, and turned into a rich multi-sensory event as a result. This is the golden ideal of moralistic films: explain why a certain lifestyle is enticing, and then explain why it is bad. Most movies that are able to do the former are completely helpless to do that latter. Once you've demonstrated, using all the tools of cinema, that war is exhilarating, a drug high is transcendent, reckless sex is fun, it's simply ludicrous to expect that any but the best filmmaker can round the corner to making us feel, in our gut, that it's just not worth the cost. Well, Scorsese is, not the best filmmaker, but a fucking damn good one, and this was at the peak of his abilities. I'd say he had one more unassailable masterpiece in him, 1993's The Age of Innocence, and ever since then has spent most of his career stalled in exceptionally good territory. And as much as he's able to use music, and Schoonmaker's driving editing, and the dreamily fragmentary script he and Pileggi wrote, and Michael Ballhaus's handsome, elegant cinematography, and De Niro's great performance as the boundlessly charismatic and magnetic James Conway, all in concert to strongly depict the allure of the world and power that capture Henry, and through him captures Karen, and through her captures all of us. As much as he can do that, he still makes it seem ugly. He still makes it seem dangerous. He still makes that ending, where Henry grouses about living a boring life in the suburbs, where he can't even get good Italian carry-out, feel more like a relief for us. No matter what the character thinks, he, and we, somehow got out with our lives, and let's for God's sake not go back there. Maybe that's why there hasn't been a great gangster film in the 27 years since Goodfellas came out. Only the TV show The Sopranos comes close, and it still ran out of gas long before it ended once this film confronted pop culture with the utter lie that is the gangster picture. Where the hell was the genre to go? Once something has been perfected the way it was perfected here, what else can you say? Simultaneously fascinating and repellent, Goodfellas is Martin Scorsese's colorful but dramatically unsatisfying inside look at mafia life in 1955-80 New York City. Commercial prospects for the overlong release appear relatively modest, and noisy bloodletting is likely to take place between warring critical camps. Scorsese's intent here, to show how a life of brutal crime could look compelling to an Irish-Italian kid whose sordid upbringing hasn't prepared him for anything better, is undercut by the off-putting, opaque characterization of Ray Liotta. Sympathy is not the issue here, empathy is. First half of the film, introing Ray Liotta and viewer to the mafia milieu, is wonderful. Scorsese's perfectly cast friezes of grotesque hoodlum types are caricatures in the best sense of the word. There's a giddy sense of exploring a forbidden world with conventional blinders removed. The second half, however, doesn't develop the dramatic conflicts between the character and the milieu that are hinted at earlier. The effect is simply to keep piling on and intensifying Liotta's horrific and ultimately numbing descent into depravity. Working from the non-fiction book Wise Guy by Nicholas Pileggi, who collaborated with him on the screenplay, Scorsese returns to the subject matter of his 1973 Mean Streets but from a more distanced, older, wiser and subtler perspective. Liotta starts as a gopher for laconic neighborhood godfather Paul Sorvino, gradually coming under the tutelage of Robert De Niro, cast as a middle-aged Irish hood of considerable ruthlessness and repute. The often misplaced dramatic thread is the question of whether Liotta will adhere to his mentor's early lesson of never ratting on his fellow mobsters. The character's split ethnic identity never comes clearly into focus, whether as a tragic figure like Al Pacino in The Godfather or as an unabashed psychopath like the title characters in the craze, recent Britpic. Being somebody in a neighborhood of nobodies in Goodfellas means going along with whatever brutalities are required. This is made clear right from the credit sequence, in which Liotta queasily watches De Niro and Joe Pesci perform a cold-blooded execution. Scorsese never spares the viewer the heinousness of the murders, regularly punctuating the story. Liotta develops a flashy, pretty boy persona that overcomes the inadequately dramatized misgivings of Lorraine Bracco, who plays a Jewish girl drawn into the life of a mafia wife. "I gotta admit the truth, it turned me on," she tells the audience after Liotta viciously beats up someone who made a pass at her. Goodfellas seems to be building up to a change of heart by Liotta about what he's becoming, and to a violent break with Bracco. But both options are bypassed as the pic shows Liotta emerging from jail in 1974 to become a cocaine dealer with Bracco's enthusiastic help and against the orders of the old-fashioned Sorvino. Sorvino's scruples recall those of Marlon Brando in The Godfather, but since Goodfellas doesn't share the Godfather film's examination of the mafia's evolution in reaction to social injustice, the conflict has no weight and Scorsese misguidedly abandons his focus on the mob community to tell the unrewarding story of a lone wolf. The film's style in the second half turns into a frenetic, feverish mimicry of the wasted-looking Liotta's coked-up mental state. De Niro, who's in the process of sealing his own destruction by eliminating fellow participants in a big heist, goes along with the new economics of crime, and Liotta winds up having to choose in a pinch between freedom and loyalty. One of the film's major flaws is that De Niro, with his menacing charm, always seems more interesting than Liotta, but he isn't given enough screen time to explore the relationship fully in his top-billed supporting role. All tech contributions are first-rate, particularly the lensing by Michael Ballhaus and production design by Christy Zia, who managed to make the film look bright and alluring while still capturing the slimy bad taste of the milieu. Thelma Schoonmaker's always masterful editing is taught in the first half, but the film rambles seriously after that, wearing out its interest at least half an hour before it's over. If someone were to tell me that they thought Goodfellas was Scorsese's best film, I really couldn't argue with them. I might not agree, but it is a completely valid position, as Goodfellas is one of the best films of the 1990s and still holds up today. The film is just as skillfully made as you remember it being, 20 years later. Goodfellas opens in the middle of the story, in the middle of a scene even, after some minimalist but effective Saul-based titles. Ray Liotta, Robert De Niro and Joe Pesci drive through the dark of night when strange sounds come from the back of the car. They pull over and open the trunk, revealing a bloody mess of a man. Joe Pesci violently stabs him repeatedly before De Niro opens fire. Liotta chimes in via voiceover, "As far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be a gangster." This scene serves as an introduction to the film, but repeat viewers will recognize it also as one of the most important moments in these characters' lives, defining and shaping everything that ultimately comes to each of them. Scorsese's Goodfellas moves at a quick, chaotic pace, jumping from scene to scene, character to character. This gives the movie a gangster slice of life quality, as the film isn't traditionally plot-based. Goodfellas is rich with color and interesting visuals. Scorsese's trademark use of freeze frame has never been more exciting and well-placed than it is here. There is a heavy use of narration throughout the film, which I generally see as a crutch, but it works well for this picture. It still detaches you a bit from the actual scenes, but as this is a huge story, voiceover is really the only way to get the level of depth needed to effectively tell this tale. The use of music is excellent, with a near-constant string of pop hits from the current era of the story. The music instantly connects you to the time and place of the scene you're watching, and it sells the progression of time perfectly. It's like a massive, sprawling sound collage and is easily one of my favorite and defining parts of Goodfellas. Paul Thomas Anderson also used a similar technique in Boogie Nights to great effect. One of the most iconic moments in Goodfellas is the tracking shot following Liotta and Lorraine Bracco into the bar. The pair travel seamlessly from the building's exterior to the back entrance, through the kitchen and down tight hallways, until they finally arrive at a center stage table. The shot serves as Bracco's introduction and seduction into the gangster world. Just as she is, we are mesmerized and completely under the spell of the life. In Boogie Nights, Anderson opens his film with a similarly long tracking shot from the exterior of Morris's bar all the way through, introducing each of the characters and their glamorous lifestyle, before finally settling on the sad busboy played by Mark Wahlberg, who wants desperately to be a part of the scene. It is easy to run Anderson's film parallel as a story of the ups and downs of life in a business, but it's enough of its own film to be worthy of merit despite Anderson's obvious love and borrowing from Scorsese. Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery though, and any film worthy of it is truly something special. Goodfellas goes beyond the mob movie stereotypes to deliver compelling entertainment based on a true story. Having seen the film several times, the first hour and a half drag a bit until we get to the drug-fueled 1980s, but that's only due to my familiarity with the material. The day in the life sequence with Liotta going from place to place and trying to keep to his tight schedule amidst a drug-induced haze is still riveting and easily the highlight of the picture. I'm not as enamored with mob movies as I was when I first saw Goodfellas, which accounts for some of my detachment, but regardless, this is one of the best mob movies ever made. It goes toe-to-toe with the heavyweights, and if you haven't seen it, you're truly missing out on one of the best made films of Scorsese's career and of the 1990s. Henry grows up idolizing mobsters in his impoverished neighborhood. Things take a turn for the worse when he along with his friends Jimmy and Tommy decide to make their way up the mob hierarchy. Scorsese has obviously always fixated on two subjects during his career, mobsters and religion. This is his most famous mob movie, one that continues to be endlessly praised. However, I find it to be his worst effort, a film where he showed all of his worst instincts. The status of this movie as some kind of a cinematic masterpiece infuriates me. I always strive to pinpoint hypocrisies when I see them, and the treatment of this movie is the most hypocritical of them all. Many would complain today about the racism of Gone with the Wind or so many other classics from many decades ago, but so few would actually go on to pinpoint everything that is morally objectionable about this frustrating movie. My main gripe with Goodfellas is its glorified depiction of the gangster lifestyle. I found the central narration to be absolutely horrendous and one of the most annoying narrations in the history of cinema. The accent, the delivery, and everything about it annoyed me to no end. Through this narration, the movie posits that this lifestyle is very cool, at least initially. Most of the movie, the beginning in particular, depicts their lifestyle in such a romanticized and glorified manner that made it very uncomfortable to watch. Not only that, but the movie is told from the point of view of these criminals with whom I cannot sympathize in the slightest. Why would I love a movie that is about everything that I detest about humanity? There is not a single relatable, moving or sophisticated moment in this movie that is all about how mobsters are cool. Of the cast, Joe Pesci was the highlight for me. He deserved his Oscar for playing the funniest character in the movie. That famous scene of his about him being funny was very memorable. Lorraine Bracco is also quite good, but in a very thankless role. All actors delivered strong work here, but their characters were very unlikable obviously, so I did not care about their arcs in the slightest. Obviously, Goodfellas is technically strong. This is the only area of the movie that I genuinely appreciated. The editing by the famed Thelma Schoonmaker is top-notch, the cinematography is fantastic and the soundtrack is a banger. The movie incorporated so many hit songs from the 50s and 60s that I really enjoy, so I've had a blast listening to them. It's just a shame that all of this technical mastery was spent on a terrible script, frustrating dialogue, and a morally objectionable approach to storytelling. Pauline Kael's review of Martin Scorsese's Goodfellas highlights the film's energetic and vivid portrayal of the mafia life, comparing it to Raging Bull but with a more joyful tone. Kael appreciates the film's dynamic and exuberant depiction of mobsters reveling in their power and wealth, capturing Scorsese's passion for the Brooklyn gang milieu. While she acknowledges the movie's triumphant filmmaking and engaging visual style, she critiques the lack of depth in the characters, particularly the three main mobsters played by Ray Liotta, Robert De Niro, and Joe Pesci. Cale finds that the film, though filled with memorable scenes and impressive directorial flair, lacks a strong narrative arc and deeper character development, making it more of a celebration of filmmaking technique than a profound exploration of its subjects. Martin Scorsese's Goodfellas has a lift. It's like Raging Bull, except that it's not domineering. It's like Raging Bull made in a jolly, festive frame of mind. It's about being a guy and guys getting high on being a guy. In the Nicholas Pileggi book Wise Guy, which this movie is based on, the mafia-led mobsters are moral runts, and that was the joke of how John Huston showed them, from the dawn on down, in Prizzi's honor. But Scorsese, a rap artist keeping up the heat, doesn't go in for ironic detachment. He loves the Brooklyn gang milieu, because it's where distortion, hyperbole, and exuberance all commingle. His mobsters are high on having a wad of cash in their pockets. The movie is about being cock of the walk, with banners flying and crowds cheering. Is it a great movie? I don't think so. But it's a triumphant piece of filmmaking journalism presented with the brio of drama. Every frame is active and vivid, and you can feel the director's passionate delight in making these pictures move. When Henry Hill, Ray Liotta, the central character, crosses a Long Island street to beat up the man who tried to put the make on his girl, the dogwood is in bloom, and all through this movie we're aware of the ultra-greenness of the suburbs that the gangsters live in. These thieves are always negotiating their way through shrubs and hedges. Or they're preparing food, ceremonially, gregariously stirring vats of sauce, slicing garlic razor thin. We see them in bars and restaurants, where they take preferential treatment as their due, and in the tacky interiors of their noisy homes. We see them hijacking, fencing stolen goods, fixing horse races, shaking down restaurant owners, committing arson, preparing cargo thefts at the airport, burying murder victims. And the different aspects of their lives are like operatic motifs. What's missing? Well, there are no great voices. The script, by Pileggi and Scorsese, isn't really dramatized. Instead, Scorsese raises the volume on the music, and the guys work themselves up, get hard, erupt. This isn't the kind of mindless movie that offers up brutality as entertainment, with good guys versus bad guys. Scorsese offers up brutal racketeering and says this is all there is to these men. Scorsese's Jake LaMotta could do one thing, fight. These guys can do one thing, steal. The book is an account of the life of the actual Henry Hill, as he told it to Pileggi after he entered the Federal Witness Protection Program, and the movie picks up his story in 1955, with the obliging 11-year-old kid, half Irish, half Sicilian, working as an errand boy at the cab stand hangout of the Brooklyn neighborhood gang headed by Paul Sorvino. As the gang's pet, Henry gets the approval he wants and plenty of spending money. By the time he's 14, he's on the payroll of a construction company and knows the ins and outs of the rackets. In the years ahead, crime is a romp for him. He gets a real charge out of pulling scams side by side with his older pals, Jimmy, Robert De Niro, and Tommy, Joe Pesci, and when he takes his Jewish girlfriend, Karen, Lorraine Bracco, to flashy, expensive places, he hands out big tips and is greeted as a celebrity. He's 21. Karen, who's no bimbo, she has a sense of her worth, likes the danger that emanates from him. His life has the look of a Puerto Rican day parade crossed with a rock concert. She's excited when she sees his gun, the gun he slugged his rival with. In Raging Bull, the young male tries to ram his way through a brick wall. In Goodfellas, the young male finds a welcoming warm spot, first with Paulie and the gang, and soon with Jimmy and Tommy, and then with his wife Karen and a couple of kids, and a mistress set up in an apartment. It's a little off-key when Henry reacts to Tommy and Jimmy's acts of violence with puzzled revulsion. During a card game, Joe Pesci's Tommy, clowning around, shoots a teenager who's slow to serve him a drink. Incidents like this, they're terrifically well framed, appear to be pointing toward an awakening sensibility in Henry, but nothing comes of them, so they seem perfunctory, a sop to conventionality. De Niro has a scene where he goes berserk, and that doesn't develop into anything, either. The movie's underpinnings could have been linked together. They suggest that the mafia and other organized crime gangs are continually being destroyed from within by raw male lawlessness. De Niro's Jimmy brings off the theft of a lifetime, the $6 million Lufthansa heist, until then the biggest cash robbery in United States history, but he can't control his troops. They're so undisciplined, such small-timers at heart, that they start spending ostentatiously, and paranoiac Jimmy, who wants to keep all the dough anyway, takes it as a regretful necessity that he has to whack them, i.e., bump them off. There were at least 10 murders after the successful robbery. Paulie has strict rules against drugs, because drugs turn men into informers who destroy the family. But the family doesn't have the decency, or forethought, to support the wives and children of the men who are sent to prison, so when Henry is sent up, Karen becomes his partner, smuggling him dope that he deals inside. It's like a regular franchise. And he begins snorting cocaine. The movie is about how swindling makes you feel alive, and that's what cocaine can keep you feeling. By the time Henry is out of prison and is running a dealership from his Long Island home, he's a manic wreck, ready to sell out his mentor, Paulie, and every hood he knows. And he feels justified, because his closest pal, Jimmy, is ready to whack him and his wife, too. But Scorsese doesn't weight the incidents dramatically, he leaves the themes, and even the story, lying there inert. In a hurried, not very shapely concluding sequence, he ties up some threads and tells us about a few of the characters in final titles, omitting, though, a high comic piece of information. Hill was so determinedly crooked he used the new identity given him by the Witness Protection Program to start up a new life of thievery and was thrown out of the program. But then we've learned so little about him. It's startling to read the title telling us that Henry and Karen separated after 25 years, because we realize we don't have any knowledge of what kept them together so long. The picture has scope rather than depth. We see Henry Hill only from the outside, and he has been made to seem slightly cut off from the mob life. He has been turned into a retread of the anxious, dutiful Harvey Keitel character in Mean Streets, when he needs to be a rat and the motor of the movie. Goodfellas is like the Howard Hawks Scarface without Scarface. Paul Sorvino's Paulie comes through, reluctant to move his bulk. He basks in his power quietly, and never calls attention to himself. Though Lorraine Bracco's Karen doesn't get much screen time, she has a hot, bright vitality. She seems more sexual, more full of go, than her husband. She's in love with him even when she pulls a gun on him. And some of the minor players give the movie a frenzied, funny texture. Tony Darrow is comically desperate as a restaurant owner who's so exhausted by the mob's harassment that he pleads with Paulie to accept a partnership in the business. Welker White brings a nip of assertiveness to her scenes as a waspy drug courier who has to have her lucky hat to make a coke delivery. And all the mobsters and hangers-on and their women seem to belong to their settings. It's just the three major hoods, played by Liotta, De Niro, and Pesci, who don't have a strong enough presence. Scorsese had a great critical success with Raging Bull, 1980, selected by international polls of critics as the best film of the 80s, a picture in which he presented his central character as an icon of brutishness. This time, he wants the central characters to be realistically shallow. But what flattens the movie isn't that they're shallow sociopaths, it's that these sociopaths are conceived shallowly, the way they used to be in B pictures. It wasn't just the low budgets that were evoked by the term B picture, it was also the unmemorable characters. When Henry Hill is a child, he lives across the street from the mafia cab stand and observes the sporty life of racketeers as they get in and out of limos. He wants to make it big like them. The life he watches is like the images on movie screens that Scorsese and the rest of us watched, but we're not invited to identify with his longings. An actor can play a shallow hood and still be memorable if we're drawn in to understand the hood's motives and emotions. Bogart used to take us pretty deeply into hoods. But these actors seem too old for their parts, too settled in. They get to us only in isolated scary scenes, Pesci's Tommy demanding "What do you mean, I'm funny," De Niro's Jimmy wearing an unnatural smile as he waves Karen into what might be a death trap. Yet the movie making has such bravura that you respond as if you were at a live performance. It's Scorsese's performance. He came of age as a director in the early 70s, at a time when many film enthusiasts were caught up in the 60s idea that a good movie is always about its director. There's a streak of metaphoric truth in this, but here Scorsese puts the idea right up front. The filmmaking process becomes the subject of the movie. All you want to talk about is the glorious whizzing camera, the freeze frames, and jump cuts. That may be why young film enthusiasts are so turned on by Scorsese's work. They don't just respond to his films, they want to be him. When Orson Welles made Touch of Evil, the filmmaking process just about took over. The movie was one flourish after another. But that was 1958, and making a thriller about your own wallowing love of the film medium was a thrilling stunt. And Welles didn't drain the characters, rather, he made them more baroque, to match his flourishes. He filled the screen with stars. In 1990, when a movie spans 30 years and runs to epic length, we may miss what big characters can do. What Nick Nolte's Sly Lionel Dobie did for Scorsese's Life Lessons, in New York Stories, drawing everything together. Scorsese, the arousal junkie, makes you feel you'd like to hang out with him and listen to him tell how he brought off the effects. He's a master. But this picture doesn't have the juice and richness that come with major performances. It has no arc, and doesn't climax, it just comes to a stop. Conceivably the abruptness could work, but I don't think it does. Will the lift of the movie making still carry some people aloft? Maybe, because watching the movie is like getting strung out on pure sensation. That's Scorsese's idea of a hood's life. It's also a young film enthusiast's dream of a director's life, and in Scorsese's case it's not too far from the truth. Goodfellas begins with an often quoted and hugely recognized opening line and then continues to impress throughout with a movie full of great moments, brilliant dialogue, and a story that doesn't let you go until the movie's final moments. It's a testament to Martin Scorsese that he creates a gangster movie that feels so real, so authentic, and actually draws you in, creating a world that is appealing and in some parts looks fun and exciting. It's the perfect blend of great dialogue, amazingly realized scenes and the casting of the central three, all of which bring their best to the movie. Ray Liotta obviously has the most to do, playing the film's narrator, Henry Hill. This movie is probably his best, showcasing his talents as the wide-eyed rookie in the gangster underworld, slowly being transformed into one of the Goodfellas, corrupted by the money, the glamour, and other addictions along the way. It's a perfect acting performance. It is outdone by Joe Pesci though, again, in his best performance. The unhinged, often terrifying Tommy DeVito is Joe Pesci at his best. Calm, quirky and charming in one moment and then angry, loud, and abrasive in another. It's Joe Pesci that gives the movie its edge and most of its famous scenes, lines, and moments, none more so than the infamous funny scene. Goodfellas is also unusual in that it offers a very subdued, quite reserved performance from Robert De Niro. It is what the film requires, but in a movie about gangsters, he is the one that is the calmer, more level-headed, at least for most of the movie. It's still a great performance and the film is great because the chemistry between the three is fantastic. The story itself is a classic rise and fall of a gangster, but because it builds the characters so well, it feels like a fresh approach to a well-known story. There is very little completely new here, but it's delivered in a sharp, quick, and often funny way, making the more dramatic, violent moments so much more graphic and jarring. What Scorsese delivers is arguably his best gangster movie amongst so many other classics. Casino is great, but these characters are more well-rounded and developed. The Departed is fantastic, but Goodfellas tells a truer, more realistic gangster story. It's also that underpinning element of truth that makes Goodfellas so much more interesting. The idea that these events could and probably did happen, even with the obvious elements of exaggeration, make the movie much more shocking and appealing in equal measure. This month marks the release of the newest Martin Scorsese film, Killers of the Flower Moon, a 3.5-hour epic following the Osage murders and the formation of the FBI. To honor the release of another film from one of the all-time great directors, I'll be reviewing one of my personal favorite films, Goodfellas. Based on the 1985 non-fiction book Wise Guy by Nicholas Pileggi, Goodfellas has been called the second best mob film by The Guardian, only beaten by The Godfather, Part 2. In my opinion, it's not number 2. Goodfellas is a film about the life of Henry Hill, a mobster associated with the Lucky's crime family in New York City. The film spans 25 years, following Hill as he is introduced to the mob lifestyle and his meteoric rise to the top of the game. The cast is as stellar as they come, with hard-hitting performances from Robert De Niro, James Conway, Ray Liotta, Henry Hill, Lorraine Bracco, Karen Hill, and Joe Pesci, Tommy DeVito, who won an Oscar for the role. Liotta delivers a solid performance as Hill, but the performances of De Niro and Pesci are truly excellent. De Niro plays a suave con man who blossoms into a father figure and mentor to Hill. Pesci plays a spontaneous hothead, and you can't seem to take your eyes off of what he's doing on screen. Although these characters are not the people you'd want to be friends with, the actors do a great job of making them likable and giving them complex motivations for joining the mob. The story, which follows real-life events, focuses on themes of morality, ambition, and loyalty. Near the beginning of the film, Jimmy Conway gives a young Henry Hill a concise word of advice: never rat on your friends and keep your mouth shut. This suggestion takes Hill a long way, as he becomes one of the most trusted members of the Lucky's crime family. Loyalty in the mafia is a must, and anyone who goes against this code of loyalty knows death might not be far behind. Scorsese drew from his experiences of growing up on the Lower East Side of Manhattan when directing this film. He wrote the script alongside Pileggi, ensuring that the dialogue would be grounded and natural, reflecting the idiosyncrasies of the speech patterns of New York mobsters at the time. What results is realistic dialogue that isn't afraid to interrupt and overlap one another. Because the film spans 25 years, there is a lot of information that has to be condensed down into the 2.5-hour runtime. The pacing is at breakneck speeds, and it never slows down, but it's done in a way consistent with how Hill would have been experiencing life at the time. The gangsters of the time led a cocaine-fueled, fast-paced lifestyle that simply wasn't sustainable. The film does a perfect job of portraying this, especially in the frenetic, paranoia-driven sequence set to Harry Nilsson's Jump into the Fire. Scorsese thrives in the soundtrack department, using period music to immerse the viewer in the time period that they're watching. Scorsese delivers what is, in my opinion, the definitive mobster film, and yes, I've seen the Godfather trilogy. The performances, subject matter, and pacing keep you on the edge of your seat the entire film, and you find yourself rooting for the protagonist, even if his actions might be despicable. Goodfellas is one of my favorite films, and it's quintessentially Scorsese. The pacing, the dialogue and the music all make this an incredible viewing experience. Goodfellas might be the last true one-liner machine gangster movie ever made. As film noir and mafia stories never really left the screen, the quote a likable gangster style who started with Mario Puzo's Godfather is something that left the big screen almost completely. Except for The Sopranos, who owned HBO along with The Wire, it's something sadly seen as cliché and over with. The Goodfellas are Henry Hill, Liotta, Jimmy Conway, De Niro, and Tommy DeVito, Pesci, three friends who are trying to make it in the criminal underworld without being members of the mafia. They are mainly robbers, stick-up men and good earners to their boss Paul Sorvino. Goodfellas narrator is Henry, who starts as a teenager, impressed by the success and the glamorous lifestyle of older Jimmy Conway. He will rise and fall through the ranks of the local mob, as the Cicero family has hard time to adapt to the new realities of the underworld. In typical earlier Scorsese style, Goodfellas could almost be a stage play due to the complexity and the distant camera of many scenes. In family saga fashion, its action scenes are satellite to many meals, reunions, and simple group discussions that makes the narration go forward. Compared to newer stuff like The Departed or Shutter Island, it feels stripped, almost novel-like, but you can appreciate the subtle pacing and the hard-nosed scenes that always define the Italian-American director. Acting is also what makes a good part of this movie. Joe Pesci plays his first small man syndrome character, and arguably his best, a role that he will keep doing again and again over the 90s. Tommy DeVito is scary, borderline psychopathic, and Pesci's slapstick performance gives it great credibility. De Niro is equal to himself as he delivers the goods as the older, smarter, and mature Jimmy Conway. Henry Hill is also a high point in Ray Liotta's struggling career. The later part of the movie, Henry's life is getting derailed and Liotta renders extremely well the nameless panic and the paranoia of the doomed mobster. Like Pesci though, it was a one-time deal because he never got quite close to this amazing performance. Goodfellas comes at the end of a cycle formed by The Godfather and Scarface, which depicts the intimate life of successful gangsters. Some would say that you can feel the exhaustion and the similarities to the two first franchises, but I think Goodfellas distinguishes itself by its portrait of friendship against the stakes of the underground world and through the gritty and over-the-top madness of Joe Pesci. It's a little bare and predictable since it follows an established formula from so close, that you could almost call it a worship movie. Despite its unoriginal streaks, it's worth many viewings. Still looking for a film to quarantine stream tonight? Quit looking, because I've decided for you. Martin Scorsese's 1990 gangster classic Goodfellas is now available to watch on Netflix. Scorsese's hyper-stylized, raw, yet oddly human lifelong tale of wise guy Henry Hill, Ray Liotta, is revered as one of the if not the best mob movies ever made to date. And yes, that includes the first two Godfather films. Goodfellas is based on the book Wise Guy by Nicholas Pileggi, who ended up co-writing the script with Scorsese. Both the book and film document the life of mob associate Henry Hill, who was a longtime mobster within the Lucky's crime family. Henry, who was enthralled in the mafia lifestyle from a young age, slowly makes his way up the mysterious and hierarchical chain of La Cosa Nostra, the mafia. Throughout the film, the highs and pitfalls of this lifestyle are narrated through several characters' points of view, but most notably Henry's and those closest to him. Movie buffs out there will know Goodfellas is world-renowned director Martin Scorsese's wheelhouse. Scorsese, unsurprisingly, enlists the help of the best character actor of all time, his good friend and consigliere Robert De Niro, for the role of fellow wise guy Jimmy Conway. And who can forget the great Joe Pesci, who delivers one of the most devilish yet hilarious roles in cinema history as hothead and highly insecure Tommy DeVito. In great Scorsese fashion, the violent and unforgiving world of the mafia is revealed through an extremely realistic and, at times, darkly comedic lens. Going into this film, what more could you ask for? Scorsese is very specific and particular for his portrayals of the mob lifestyle, and this film is no different. Goodfellas has become the gold standard for mob movies in modern cinema. Using his mastery of cinematic techniques and storytelling, the film was nominated for 6 Academy Awards, with Pesci going on to win Best Supporting Actor. In my mind, there is no better cinema performance than Pesci here commanding the screen as DeVito. He's an absolute force throughout the story, a legitimate ticking time bomb that you just don't know when, where, and on whom he will erupt. A very well-deserved Oscar, and if you think that's funny, you'll understand once you watch. To play our 3 main wise guys, Liotta, De Niro, and Pesci all went through extensive research periods for their roles. Though De Niro and Pesci's roles were fictionalized, all 3 of their characters were rooted in truth and accuracy. They talked extensively with the author of Wise Guys and were even given information that wasn't even included in the book to work off of while building their characters. This dedication and want for accuracy gives Goodfellas the rocket fuel it needs. Well, that, and a still mouth-watering sauce scene. Each of these characters are constantly dealing with a power and authority complex of their own throughout the film, both within the mob and with each other. Henry, Jimmy, and Tommy are all looking to make their name in the family and become untouchable, though for Henry that was never possible as he isn't full Italian blood. The path of a mobster can be a long and grueling one filled with violence, lies and betrayal. It's a long life in the mob and, though the perks may seem great, there's always something dark around the corner. The film shows how ambition for the wrong things can only end badly. I also want to praise Lorraine Bracco for her portrayal of Henry's wife Karen. Her character deals mainly with the damage done to the Hills' home life in light of Henry's choices and puts on an absolute masterclass performance as the disgruntled wife. It's a truly believable character that is rooted in emotional pain and desperate for attention. While watching, you can almost see flashes of Margot Robbie's character in Scorsese's The Wolf of Wall Street. Though both characters are based on real people, I would be shocked if inspiration wasn't pulled from Bracco's Karen Hill. Scorsese's tenacious and meticulous style is not lost in Goodfellas. His creativeness in unraveling a narrative is center stage here, and the viewer can truly feel how close to home these stories are to its filmmaker. Iconic sequences like the walk through the Copacabana to Then He Kissed Me by the Crystals without a single cut show how confident and comfortable Scorsese is in this world, along with his main character. His camera work and decisions almost lend an insider's perspective into a life in the mob. These long sequences that dominate the better half of Goodfellas' first act can be representative of the confidence and control over life that Henry has at this time. Henry's walk across the street to beat up Karen's neighbor accomplishes this as well. No cuts. As the film goes on, however, we experience shorter sequences that feature many more cuts and hectic camera work, symbolizing Henry's spiral out of control. The importance of this movie to the gangster genre is invaluable. This is a movie that truly deserves all the praise it gets and should have won Best Picture, but took a backseat to Dances with Wolves. Ever since his breakout hit Mean Streets, Martin Scorsese has been renowned for telling stories that humanize gangsters and subvert the typical Hollywood mafia movie with a more accurate portrayal of the Italian-American experience. This thesis reached its pinnacle with Scorsese's 1990 masterpiece Goodfellas. Goodfellas plays like a mafia home movie. It has a sense of intimacy and a ring of authenticity that are almost never seen in gangster films. Goodfellas looks beyond the usual genre archetypes to explore the real human beings who get caught up in organized crime. Goodfellas chronicles the life of New York mobster Henry Hill, from his working-class upbringing to his tumultuous career in organized crime and his ultimate undoing in the illicit drug trade. As far back as he can remember, Henry grew up idolizing the mafia, but when he joins their ranks as a mid-level mobster, he quickly realizes it's not all roses. Whereas The Godfather indulges in the glamorous lifestyle of the boss and his inner circle, Goodfellas takes a look at the lower-ranking guys who have to do the boss dirty work and only get to enjoy a fraction of the glamour. Ever since his breakout hit Mean Streets, Martin Scorsese has been renowned for telling stories that humanize gangsters and subvert the typical Hollywood mafia movie with a more accurate portrayal of the Italian-American experience. This thesis reached its pinnacle with Scorsese's 1990 masterpiece Goodfellas. Goodfellas plays like a mafia home movie. It has a sense of intimacy and a ring of authenticity that are almost never seen in gangster films. Goodfellas looks beyond the usual genre archetypes to explore the real human beings who get caught up in organized crime. Goodfellas chronicles the life of New York mobster Henry Hill, from his working-class upbringing to his tumultuous career in organized crime and his ultimate undoing in the illicit drug trade. As far back as he can remember, Henry grew up idolizing the mafia, but when he joins their ranks as a mid-level mobster, he quickly realizes it's not all roses. Whereas The Godfather indulges in the glamorous lifestyle of the boss and his inner circle, Goodfellas takes a look at the lower-ranking guys who have to do the boss dirty work and only get to enjoy a fraction of the glamour. With the rapid pacing of Thelma Schoonmaker's editing and the frantic non-linear storytelling of Scorsese and Nicholas Pileggi's script, Goodfellas recaptures the manic energy of Jules and Jim's opening scene and stretches it to feature length. Scorsese pulls out all the tricks in the cinematic playbook: freeze frames, fourth wall breaks, voice-over narration, zippy montages, meticulously crafted wonders to reflect the feverish whirlwind of life in the mob. The Goodfellas soundtrack sounds like fidgety fingers let loose on a jukebox, flitting from Tony Bennett to the Shangri-Las to Bobby Darin to Cream to Muddy Waters. Scorsese and his cinematographer Michael Ballhaus crafted every shot in the movie with intention. As young Henry watches the mobsters outside his window, Scorsese borrows a shot of Norman Bates spying on Marion Crane from Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho to suggestive voyeuristic gaze and highlight just how enamored he is with their lifestyle. At the diner, Scorsese uses a slow dolly zoom to illustrate Jimmy's paranoia as the walls are closing in. In the helicopter sequence, he uses extreme close-ups, frenetic cuts, frenzied camera movements, and a constantly changing soundtrack to capture Henry's coke-frazzled mindset. Goodfellas set the precedent for Scorsese's gangster biopics. It's a cautionary tale warning its audience against a life of crime. Like Casino and The Irishman after it, Goodfellas cautions us that the criminal path can only end one of two ways, with a swift execution or living in fear of a swift execution. Goodfellas ending hammers this home when Henry stands on the doorstep of his suburban prison and sees his whacked friend Tommy DeVito recreating a shooting scene from the Great Train Robbery. The message is clear: he'll spend the rest of his life looking over his shoulder. The first half successfully seduces us with the siren song of the Mafia, the same way Henry gets swept up in it. The iconic tracking shot of Henry skipping the queue at the Copacabana and taking Karen through the kitchen to a table placed especially for them right by the stage has the same effect on us that it has on Karen. It doesn't seem half bad. And then, in its second half, Goodfellas shows the devastating cost of falling into this life. After the fatal mistake of killing made man Billy Batts, Henry's world collapses in on itself. The cast of Goodfellas all deliver incredible performances. Ray Liotta anchors the movie with a lead turn that's charismatic and darkly hilarious, but also brutally raw in his portrayal of abuse and addiction. Lorraine Bracco painfully captures Karen's emotional anguish, Robert De Niro masterfully conceals the ruthlessness of Jimmy Conway under a facade of friendliness, and Paul Sorvino manages to convey the fear that Paulie strikes into people with a single look. Joe Pesci more than earns his Oscar with his scene-stealing turn as Tommy, making a violent sociopath strangely lovable, and making a true crime thriller funnier than most comedies. Goodfellas opens with three gangsters driving upstate to dispose of the corpse in their trunk, only to find that he's not quite dead yet, and it maintains that level of intensity, allure, and pitch-black humor until the climax. Save for Taxi Driver and Raging Bull, Goodfellas might be Scorsese's masterpiece, and on par with The Godfather and its first sequel, it's the greatest gangster movie ever made. This film, directed by Martin Scorsese, screenplay by Nicholas Pileggi, based on Wise Guy, produced by Irwin Winkler, starring Robert De Niro, cinematography Michael Ballhaus, edited by Thelma Schoonmaker, production companies Warner Brothers. Distributed by Warner Brothers. Release date September 9, 1990. Running time 146 minutes. Country United States. Language English. Budget $25 million. Box office $47.1 million.